Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Patricia Nighthawk, and I've been guiding people through America's longest cave system for 12 years. Mammoth Cave in Kentucky stretches for over 400 miles underground. That's more mapped passages than anywhere else on Earth. Most folks don't realize how easy it is to get lost down there. One wrong turn, and you might never find your way back. I grew up hearing stories about these caves. My Cherokee grandmother used to tell me the old people avoided the deepest parts. They called them death paths. But I never put much stock in old stories. I was a geology major before I became a ranger. I believed in limestone and water tables, not spirits. March of 1968 was busy season. Spring break brought college kids and families from all over. The cave stays at 54 degrees year-round, so it's perfect when the weather outside can't make up its mind. That particular week, I was running 3 tours a day through the main passages, the safe ones tourists are supposed to see. The cave has rules, simple ones. Stay with your group. Don't touch the formations. Follow the marked paths. These rules exist for good reasons. The unmarked passages can drop into pits deeper than a 10-story building. Underground rivers can sweep you away in seconds. And some passages are so narrow you have to crawl on your belly for hundreds of yards. But the biggest danger isn't falling or drowning. It's the darkness. True darkness, the kind that makes your eyes water from trying to see. Down in the deep parts, if your light fails, you're blind as a newborn. Sound bounces strange off cave walls. You start hearing things that aren't there. Or maybe they are there, and you just never noticed before. I should have paid more attention to what my grandmother told me. She said some holes in the earth go so deep they touch places that were never meant to see daylight, places where things learn to live without light, without warmth, without mercy. The morning it started, I was leading a group of 15 college students from Eastern Kentucky University. They were geology majors too, which meant they asked good questions and didn't scream when bats flew overhead. I liked groups like that. Smart kids who appreciated what they were seeing. We were in Echo River, one of the prettier sections about a mile underground. The formations there look like frozen waterfalls, and when you shine a light through them, they glow like stained glass. The kids were taking pictures, their camera flashes lighting up the chamber in quick, bright bursts. That's when I noticed something was wrong. The temperature had dropped. Not by much, maybe 5 or 6 degrees. But in a cave that never changes, you notice things like that. My breath started misting just slightly, and I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. "Miss Nighthawk," called out one of the students, a girl named Jenny with thick glasses. "There's something weird about these photos." She showed me her camera's viewfinder. The flash had lit up the main chamber fine, but in the background, where the passage curved into darkness, there were pale shapes, tall and thin, like people standing back there. But we were the only tour group in this section today. "Probably just rock formations," I told her. "The shadows can play tricks when the flash bounces around." But I made a mental note to check that passage later. In 12 years of guiding tours, I'd never seen formations that looked quite like people. The rest of the tour went normal until we reached the lunchroom, a big round chamber where groups usually stop to eat. As the students unpacked their sandwiches, I counted heads like always, 15 students, plus me. But something felt wrong with the number. I counted again. Still 15. But when I looked around the chamber, ning faces, it seemed like there should be more people, like someone was missing, even though everyone was accounted for. That's when Mike Patterson, a tall kid with sandy hair, came up too. "Miss Nighthawk, I think I left my water bottle back in Echo River. Can I go grab it real quick?" "No," I said, maybe too sharp. "We never separate from the group. Ever." He looked surprised at my tone. I was surprised, too. Usually I explained the safety rules patiently. But something about the idea of him going back there alone made my stomach clench. "I'll get you water from my backup supplies," I added, trying to soften my voice. "Cave safety rule number 1, nobody goes anywhere alone." As the group finished eating, I kept glancing back toward the passage we'd come from. The darkness seemed deeper than usual, like it was pushing into our circle of lamplight. And twice, just at the edge of hearing, I thought I caught a sound like fingernails clicking against stone. When we headed back toward the entrance, I made sure to walk at the rear of the group, where I could keep an eye on that passage behind us. Every few steps I'd turn and shine my flashlight back into the darkness. Nothing there, just empty cave. But the whole way out, I felt like something was following us, staying just beyond the reach of our lights. The next morning I came in early to check the duty roster. Robert Flintstone, the senior guide, was supposed to lead a small tour through the Devil's Staircase, one of the deeper sections. But his truck wasn't in the parking lot. "Bobby's running late," said Marie, the office manager. "His group is supposed to start in 20 minutes. I checked the sign-in sheet. 6 tourists, a family of 4 from Ohio and an older couple celebrating their anniversary. They'd paid extra for the advanced tour that goes deeper than most people ever see. I'll take them," I said. "Bobby probably had car trouble." The Devil's Staircase earned its name honestly. You climb down a series of narrow ledges, each one steeper than the last, until you're nearly 200 feet under ground. The air gets thick down there, and the silence is so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. But these tourists had specifically requested the deep tour. They wanted to see parts of the cave that most visitors never experience. And I'd done this route hundreds of times. The family, the Hendersons, were excited about everything. The 2 kids, maybe 10 and 12 years old, peppered me with questions about how the cave formed. The anniversary couple, the Walkers, held hands and took pictures of each other in front of interesting formations. We were about an hour in, at the bottom of the staircase, when I noticed the scratches. They were carved into the limestone wall, about chest high. Long, parallel marks, like someone had dragged their fingernails down the stone. But limestone is hard rock. It would take metal tools to make marks like that, or incredible strength. "What caused those?" asked Mr. Henderson, pointing at the scratches. "Probably early explorers marking their route," I said, though I'd never seen them before. And I'd been through this section dozens of times. We moved deeper into the passage. The walls closed in until we had to walk single file, following the beam of my headlamp. Behind us, the family's flashlights created a chain of yellow circles in the darkness. That's when we found Robert's equipment. His headlamp was sitting on a rock ledge, still turned on but dimming. Next to it, his emergency rope and first aid kit lay scattered on the cave floor, but no sign of Robert himself. "Stay close together," I told the group, trying to keep my voice calm. We might have another guide who got separated from his group. I called out, "Robert, Bobby, you down here?" My voice echoed off the walls, but the echo was wrong. Instead of fading gradually, it cut off sharp, like something had swallowed the sound. That's when little Sally Henderson started, crying. "Mom, there's people watching us," she whispered, pointing past our circle of light. I shone my flashlight where she was pointing, empty passage stretching into darkness. But for just a second, right before the light hit the far wall, I thought I saw movement, something pale ducking back around a corner. "It's just shadows, sweetheart," Mrs. Henderson said, but her voice was shaking. I made a decision. "We're heading back, now." As we turned around, Mr. Walker grabbed my arm. "What about your friend?" "The other guide." "I'll come back for him with backup," I said. "Right now, my job is getting you folks out safely." But when we reached the spot where the passage split, one branch leading back to the entrance, the other diving deeper into unexplored territory, I stopped cold. There were wet footprints on the cave floor. Bare feet, but wrong somehow. The toes were too long, and there were no arch marks, like whoever made them had never worn shoes in their life. The prints led from the deep passage toward where we'd found Robert's equipment. "Everyone stay together," I said. "Hold hands if you have to. Do not let go." We started climbing back up the Devil's Staircase. It should have taken 30 minutes to reach safe territory, but every step felt like we were moving through thick mud. The darkness behind us seemed to press closer, and I kept hearing sounds that might have been water dripping or might have been footsteps. When Sally Henderson started crying again, I turned to comfort her. That's when I saw them. 3 pale figures stood at the bottom of the staircase, just at the edge of our light. They were tall and thin, dressed in what looked like rags. But their faces, I couldn't make out their faces clearly. The light seemed to slide off them like they weren't entirely solid. "Don't look back," I whispered to the group. "Just keep climbing, fast as you can." But Mr. Henderson had already seen them. "What the hell are those?" he said, loud enough that his voice bounced off the walls. The pale figures moved when they heard him. Not walking, flowing, like they were made of smoke. And they were coming up the staircase behind us. I pulled out my emergency flare and broke the seal. Red light exploded through the passage, brighter than all our flashlights combined. The pale figures stopped moving and made sounds like animals in pain. "Go, go, go," I shouted. We ran the rest of the way out, not stopping until we reached daylight. The family piled into their car and drove off without even asking for a refund. The anniversary couple left so fast they forgot their camera. Back at the ranger station, I called for backup and reported Robert missing, but when the search team went down to look for him, they found something I'll never forget. He was alive, sitting against a wall in the deep passage, staring at nothing. His eyes were gone. Not injured. Gone. Like someone had carefully removed them without damaging anything else. When the paramedics tried to talk to him, he just smiled and said, "They showed me how beautiful the darkness is." Robert spent the rest of his life in a mental hospital. The official reports said he'd had a psychological break and injured himself, but I knew better. Something was living in the deep places of Mammoth Cave. Something that had been there long before the first explorers arrived. And now it knew we existed too. The cave was closed to deep tours after what happened to Robert. The Park Service brought in a team of investigators, geologists, psychologists, safety experts. They spent a week examining every inch of the passages where we'd found him. Their report concluded that Robert had suffered a mental breakdown brought on by isolation stress and disorientation. The eye injuries were self-inflicted during his psychotic episode. Case closed. But I knew they were wrong because the incidents didn't stop. 2 weeks later, Helen Morse, a photographer from National Geographic, got per bonne mission to document some of the deeper chambers. She was working on a story about America's hidden underground worlds. Professional cave photographer, 20 years of experience, all the right equipment. They found her camera 3 days after she went missing. The film inside showed her normal shots, beautiful formations, underground rivers, the kind of pictures that end up in magazines. But the last few frames were different. They showed pale shapes moving through her pictures, getting closer to the camera with each shot. The final photograph was just darkness, but if you looked close, you could see eyes, dozens of them, reflecting her camera flash like animals caught at night. Helen's body was discovered a week later in a passage that hadn't been mapped yet. Her throat had been punctured by something sharp, but she'd bled very little, like her blood had been drained slowly over time. The Park Service tried to keep it quiet, but word got out. Mammoth Cave was dangerous. People stopped booking tours. The local papers started calling it the Cave of Death. That's when the government stepped in. Men in dark suits arrived one morning and set up a temporary office in the park headquarters. They said they were from the Department of Interior, but they asked questions that had nothing to do with park management. "Miss Nighthawk," said their leader, a thin man with gray hair and cold eyes, "we understand you've had some unusual experiences in the cave system." "I've reported everything through proper channels," I said. "We're not here about your reports. We're here because similar incidents have been documented in other cave systems. Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico, Cave of the Winds in Colorado. Always the same pattern: missing people, disturbed wildlife, and sightings of what witnesses describe as pale humanoid figures." He showed me a file full of photographs. Caves I'd never seen, but the images were familiar. Scratch marks on walls, footprints with 2 long toes, and in several photos, blurry shapes that might have been people but moved wrong. "What are they?" I asked. "That's what we're trying to determine. But we need someone with your experience to help us investigate the deepest sections of Mammoth Cave." places where tourists have never been. I should have said no, should have quit my job and moved somewhere flat, where the deepest hole was a basement. But these things had killed my colleagues. They'd turned Robert into something barely human, and they were still down there, growing bolder. What do you need me to do? 3 days later, I found myself rappelling into the bottomless pit, a section of Mammoth Cave that dropped so far down our ropes couldn't reach the bottom. The government team had set up equipment to map the lower chambers, using sound waves and heat sensors. What they found defied everything we knew about cave formation. The passages down there weren't natural. They'd been carved, widened, shaped by something with tools and intelligence. And they were warm, nearly 70 degrees, much higher than the cave's normal temperature. "There's definitely a heat source down there," said Dr. Martinez, the team's geologist. "Could be geothermal activity, but the pattern is wrong. It's too regular, too organized." We descended in a group of 6, 3 government agents, Dr. Martinez, a cave rescue specialist named Tom Crawford, and me. Our lights revealed passages that branched and connected in ways that reminded me of ant tunnels, but sized for much larger creatures. And everywhere, scratch marks. On the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Some fresh, some old enough that moisture had begun to smooth them over. "How long do you think they've been down here?" Tom asked. "Long time," I said, running my hand over a section of marks. "These older ones could be decades old, maybe longer." We were following the main passage when we heard the first sound, a clicking noise, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone upping rocks together in a pattern. "Communication," whispered Dr. Martinez. "They're talking to each other." The clicking came from ahead of us, then from behind, then from side passages we hadn't even noticed. We were surrounded, but we couldn't see anything beyond our circle of light. "Stay together," said Agent Morrison, the team leader. "If we encounter anything, do not attempt contact. These subjects have already demonstrated hostile behavior." Subjects, like they were studying animals in a lab. The passage opened into a large chamber, bigger than anything I'd seen in 12 years of cave work. Our lights couldn't reach the far walls, but as we moved into the space, our beams began picking up details. Bones, scattered across the floor like someone had been collecting them for years. Animal bones mostly, deer, raccoons, bats, but mixed in with them, unmistakably human remains. And built against the walls, structures that looked almost like crude furniture. Sleeping areas made from moss and torn fabric, piles of objects that might have been tools carved from stone and bone. "Jesus," Tom breathed. "They're living down here. Really living." That's when the lights started going out. Not all at once, one by one, like someone was moving through our group and switching them off. Agent Morrison's headlamp died first, then Dr. Martinez's flashlight. In seconds, we were down to my light and Tom's emergency lantern. "Equipment failure," Morrison said, but his voice was tight with fear. "Move toward the exit, now." We started backing toward the passage entrance, but something was wrong with the distance. The chamber had felt big when we entered, but now the walls seemed much closer, like the space was shrinking around us. Tom's lantern flickered and went out. In the complete darkness, the clicking sounds grew louder, closer. And I realized they weren't just random communication. They were coordinated. Hunting calls. I fumbled for my emergency flare, but before I could light it, something brushed past me in the darkness. Cold skin moving fast, smelling like old bones and deep earth. Someone screamed. "Dr. Martinez, I think." But the sound cut off suddenly. Then Tom's voice. "They got him! They got Martinez!" My flare ignited, filling the chamber with red light. What I saw will stay with me forever. They were people, but not people. Tall and thin like I'd seen before, but up close I could see they'd once been human. Their skin was paper white and stretched tight over bones that had grown in wrong directions. Their eyes were gone, leaving empty sockets that seemed to drink in our light. And their fingers had become something between hands and claws, perfect for digging through stone. There were dozens of them, standing in a circle around us, and in the center of the circle, Dr. Martinez lay motionless while one of the creatures knelt beside him doing something to his throat with its claw fingers. Cave-adapted humans, I whispered, understanding flooding through me. They've been down here so long, they've changed. The flare wouldn't last long. Maybe 2 minutes of light, then we'd be back in their world of permanent darkness. "Can you get us out of here?" Morrison asked. I looked around the chamber, trying to orient myself. The passage entrance should have been behind us, but in the flare's red glow, I couldn't tell which direction we'd come from. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm lost." The pale creatures began closing their circle, moving with the patience of things that had learned to hunt in total darkness. And as my flare started to dim, I realized we were about to become permanent residents of their underground world. The flare was dying, and I had one backup. Maybe 3 minutes of light left before we joined Dr. Martinez on the cave floor. But as the red glow faded, I noticed something. The pale creatures didn't move smoothly in the light. They jerked and stumbled like it hurt them. Evolution that had adapted them for total darkness had made them vulnerable to illumination. "Tom," I whispered, "still have your magnesium emergency kit?" "Yeah, but—" "Light it when I say." The flare went out. Complete darkness returned, and immediately the clicking sounds grew louder. I could hear the creatures moving closer, their claws scraping against stone. Something touched my shoulder with fingers that felt like ice-cold bone. "Now!" Tom's magnesium flare exploded like a white sun, brighter than anything those creatures had experienced in their entire lives. The sound they made wasn't human, a shrieking wail that echoed off the chamber walls like a physical force. In that brilliant white light, I could finally see the chamber clearly. And what I saw explained everything. This wasn't just a cave. It was a settlement. The bone furniture, the sleeping areas, the carefully carved passages. This was a civilization that had developed completely separate from the surface world. Along the walls, crude paintings told a story. Humans entering caves, then changing over generations. Growing pale, losing their eyes, adapting to life in perpetual darkness. They'd been down here for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. They're not monsters, I realized out loud. They're what we become if we stay too long. But understanding them didn't make them less dangerous. As my eyes adjusted to the magnesium light, I could see Dr. Martinez more clearly. He was alive but unconscious, with small puncture wounds in his neck. They'd been feeding on him slowly, keeping him alive like livestock. The creatures had retreated to the far edges of the chamber, covering their empty eye sockets with their hands. But I could see them regrouping, waiting for our light to fail. "There," Tom pointed to a passage entrance I hadn't noticed before. "That leads up. I can feel air moving." Agent Morrison was trying to revive Dr. Martinez while Agent Collins covered them with his restored flashlight. But we couldn't carry an unconscious man through cave passages and outrun creatures that knew every inch of these tunnels. "Leave him," Morrison said quietly. "No." The word came out harsher than I intended. Nobody gets left behind. That's the first rule of cave rescue. I pulled out my last emergency flare and broke the seal, but didn't light it yet. "Tom, you and Collins get Martinez between you. Morrison, you lead toward that passage. I'll cover the rear." "What about when the lights run out?" Tom asked. I looked around the chamber one more time. At the bone furniture, the primitive paintings, the evidence of a human community that had survived in impossible conditions. These creatures had once been people like us, trapped underground until they adapted or died. Then we find out if 12 years of cave experience is worth anything. We started moving toward the passage, Tom and Collins half carrying Dr. Martinez between them. The pale creatures followed us, staying just beyond our lights, but I could hear them communicating in their clicking language. They were coordinating something. The passage sloped upward, which was good, but it also narrowed quickly. Soon we were moving single file with barely enough room for 2 people to carry a third. That's when they attacked. The clicking sound suddenly stopped, always a bad sign. In caves, silence usually means something is about to happen. I lit my final flare just as the first creature dropped from a ceiling crevice I hadn't even seen. It landed on Collins, and they both went down. Tom lost his grip on Dr. Martinez, who slumped against the passage wall. Morrison spun around with his flashlight, trying to track multiple targets in the narrow space. More creatures poured out of side passages I'd missed in the darkness. They moved like water, flowing around our lights, using every shadow and crevice. But they were still cautious of the illumination, which gave me an idea. "Give me all your flashlights," I shouted over the sounds of fighting. "Trust me." Tom threw me his light while trying to revive Collins, who was bleeding from claw marks on his arms. Morrison hesitated, then tossed his flashlight too. I had maybe 30 seconds before the flare burned out. I set all the flashlights in a circle around our group, pointing outward, creating a ring of light in the narrow passage. The creatures stopped advancing, trapped between their desire to feed and their inability to tolerate the illumination. But I could see them testing the edges of our light circle, looking for gaps. "Tom, can you get Collins moving?" "I think so. He's hurt but conscious." "What about Martinez?" Tom checked his pulse. "Alive, but we'll have to carry him." The flare was getting dimmer. Maybe a minute left, then just the flashlights, which wouldn't last forever either. "Morrison, how far to the surface from here?" He checked his equipment. "Maybe 2 miles, if this passage connects to the main system." 2 miles carrying an unconscious man with creatures hunting us in the darkness. The math wasn't good. That's when I heard something that changed everything. Water. Moving water. Getting louder as we climbed. "There's a river up ahead," I said. "If it's Echo River, it leads straight to the main cave system." The flare died. Immediately, the clicking sounds resumed, and I could hear claws scraping on stone as the creatures began testing our circle of light again. "Move," I said. "Fast as you can. Stay in the light." We started climbing again, Tom and Morrison carrying Dr. Martinez between them while Collins stumbled along behind. I walked backwards, keeping the rear flashlights pointed at the creatures following us. And they were definitely following. I could see their pale shapes moving just beyond our light, patient as death. They knew these passages better than we ever could. They could afford to wait. The sound of water grew louder. Around a bend in the passage, our lights revealed what I'd hoped for. Echo River, the same underground waterway I'd shown to tourists dozens of times. "We can follow that back to the main system," I told the group, "but we'll have to wade through water for about half a mile." "What about them?" Morrison nodded toward the creatures who had stopped following us and were gathered at the entrance to the river passage. I shined my flashlight directly at them, and they retreated into the shadows. But they didn't leave entirely. They were waiting. They won't follow us into the water, I realized. They've adapted to dry caves. The river is outside their territory. We entered the underground river, cold water swirling around our knees. The current wasn't strong, but carrying Dr. Martinez made everything more difficult. Our flashlights created dancing reflections on the water surface, making it hard to see obstacles. Behind us, the pale creatures gathered at the water's edge, clicking and chittering in their bone language. They were angry, frustrated that their prey was escaping into a world they couldn't follow. But as we waded deeper into Echo River, I began to relax for the first time in hours. Half a mile of river passage, then we'd reach the tourist section of the cave. Safety, rescue teams, medical help for Dr. Martinez and Collins. That's when Tom stumbled and dropped his end of Dr. Martinez. The unconscious man slipped under the water, and the current immediately began carrying him downstream. I lunged forward, grabbing for him in the darkness, but the river was deeper than I remembered. My flashlight went under with me, and suddenly we were in complete darkness, except for Morrison's light 20 feet away. I found Dr. Martinez by feel and managed to get his head above water, but he was completely limp. I couldn't tell if he was breathing. "Help me!" I called to the others. But when Morrison's light swung toward us, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The pale creatures hadn't stayed behind after all. They were in the water, with us, moving like ghosts beneath the surface. Their skin was so white it seemed to glow with its own light, and they moved through the water faster than anything human should be able to. One of them surfaced right next to Tom, who screamed and tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go except deeper water. I still had Dr. Martinez in my arms, trying to keep both our heads above the surface, but more creatures were emerging from the water around us, and our remaining lights were scattered and dimming. That's when I realized the truth about these things. They hadn't just adapted to caves. They'd adapted to this specific cave system. They knew every passage, every river, every hiding place. And they'd been herding us here from the beginning. The water around us began to churn as more pale shapes moved beneath the surface. Collins was shouting something, but the echoes made it impossible to understand. Morrison's light flickered and went out. In the complete darkness of the underground river, surrounded by creatures that had been human once but were something else now, I made a decision that probably saved our lives. I let go of Dr. Martinez. I let him go, because I realized something important. The pale creatures weren't trying to kill us. They were trying to take us back to their settlement. Dr. Martinez was alive when we found him because they needed us alive. As soon as I released him, 3 of the creatures immediately moved to support him in the water. They weren't drowning him, they were keeping him afloat. "Don't fight them," I called out to the others. "They want us alive." It went against every instinct, but I stopped struggling and let the creatures guide me through the dark water. Around me I could hear Tom and Collins doing the same, their panicked breathing gradually slowing. The creatures led us through passages I'd never seen before, underwater tunnels that connected different parts of the cave system. They could hold their breath much longer than normal humans, another adaptation to their underground life. When we finally surfaced, and we were in a chamber lit by phosphorescent moss growing on the walls, natural light, dim but steady, and everywhere evidence of a thriving underground civilization. There were dozens of the pale creatures, including smaller ones that must have been children. They had tools made from bone and stone, containers woven from cave moss, even primitive artwork carved into the walls. And sitting against one wall, very much alive, was Robert Flintstone. "Patricia," he said when he saw me, and his voice was different, calmer. "I was hoping you'd come." His eyes were still gone, but he moved around the chamber like he could see perfectly. Maybe better than when he had eyes. "Robert, what happened to you?" "I fell," he said simply. "Got separated from my tour group, ended up in the deep passages. They found me half dead from hypothermia and dehydration, saved my life." One of the taller creatures approached us, moving slowly to show it meant no harm. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through stone, but the words were English. "Surface dwellers," it said. "You come to our home uninvited. Take our pictures. Disturb our peace." I realized this creature was their leader, or at least their spokesperson. Someone who still remembered the surface world well enough to communicate with us. "We didn't know you were here," I said. "We thought the deep caves were empty." "Empty?" The creature made a sound that might have been laughter. "We have lived here for 20 generations. This is our world now." Tom was staring around the chamber in amazement. "How is this possible? How do you survive down here?" "We adapted," the creature said. "Generation by generation. Those who could not change died. Those who could became something new." It gestured to the other pale figures around the chamber. "We were surface dwellers once. Explorers who became lost. Settlers who came too deep. Over time, we learned to live in the eternal darkness." Dr. Martinez was lying on a bed of moss, conscious now but very weak. Collins sat beside him, his claw wounds bandaged with strips of fabric. "Why did you take our eyes?" Collins asked Robert. Robert turned his empty sockets toward us. "I asked them to. You can't see in true darkness with surface eyes. They only show you what isn't there, make you afraid of shadows. But without them, you can sense the heat of living things, hear the whisper of air currents, feel the texture of stone through your feet." He stood up and walked confidently across the uneven chamber floor, never stumbling or hesitating. "It's better this way," he said. "Cleaner, no illusions." The leader creature moved closer to our group. "Surface dwellers bring trouble, bring lights that burn, bring loud voices that disturb the stone, bring guns and machines. Some of us want to return to the deep places, where surface dwellers cannot follow. But others believe we should expand, take more of the cave system, take more of your people." It looked directly at me with its empty sockets. "You are a guide. You know these caves. You could help us understand your kind, help us avoid conflict. The offer hung in the air like moisture from an underground river. Join them. Become something new. Live in a world where darkness was natural and light was the enemy. What happens if we say no? I asked. You return to your surface world, seal the passages behind you. Never come to the deep places again. Your choice. Morrison, who had been quiet through this entire exchange, finally spoke up. And if we agree to that, you'll let us leave? All of us? All except one. The leader gestured to Robert, who smiled with his eyeless face. Some changes cannot be undone. Robert belongs here now. His eyes see only darkness, but his mind sees truth. He will stay and help us understand surface dwellers better. I looked at my old colleague, trying to read his expression. Robert, is this what you want? I'm home, Patricia. For the first time in my life, I'm really me. 3 hours later, Morrison and I emerged from Mammoth Cave carrying Collins and Dr. Martinez between us. Tom had stayed behind to help Robert settle into his new life underground. His choice, he said. The surface world had never made much sense to him anyway. The government men debriefed us for 6 hours, then classified everything under national security. The deep passages were sealed with explosives, though I suspect the pale creatures knew other ways in and out. Dr. Martinez recovered fully, though he never spoke publicly about what happened. Collins left government service and moved to Arizona, where he said there weren't any caves worth exploring. I transferred to a surface ranger position at Yellowstone National Park. Wide open spaces, no enclosed areas, no darkness deeper than a summer night. But sometimes, when I'm standing on a mountain ridge looking out over miles of wilderness, I think about Robert and Tom, about a community that learned to thrive in conditions that should have killed them, about adaptation and survival and what it really means to be human. The official report says that thermal irregularities in the deep cave system caused hallucinations and disorientation. Equipment failure led to several injuries. Psychological trauma from the cave environment resulted in persistent delusions among some team members. That's the story they tell. But I know the truth. Deep beneath Kentucky, in passages that don't appear on any map, there's a civilization that grew from human roots but became something entirely new. They're not monsters or demons. They're what happens when people refuse to give up, even when the world above ground forgets they exist. And they're still down there. Last month I got a letter forwarded from my old address. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was from Tom, though I'm not sure how he managed to send it. Rom Underground. The letter was short. Patricia, we're doing well down here. Robert is teaching the children about surface geology, and I'm helping them expand into new sections of the Cantonades cave system. Did you know Mammoth Cave connects to at least 12 other cave networks? The maps you surface dwellers have are incomplete. Don't worry about us. We're happy. But I thought you should know. We're not the only ones. There are communities like ours under Colorado, New Mexico, West Virginia, anywhere people got lost deep enough and stayed lost long enough. The world is bigger than most folks realize. Stranger too. Tell people to be careful in caves. Some passages lead places you can't come back from. But for the right kind of person, that's not always a bad thing. Your friend. Tom. I never reported the letter. What would be the point? But sometimes, when I read about missing hikers or cave explorers who vanished without a trace, I wonder if they found their way to one of those communities Tom mentioned. The pale things of Mammoth Cave taught me something important. Survival isn't about staying the same. It's about changing into whatever you need to become to keep going. And in the deepest, darkest places on Earth, people are still finding ways to survive. Just not as the same people who went down there. If you ever find yourself in a cave system, stick to the marked paths. Follow your guide. Don't wander off alone, because some passages don't lead back to the world you know. They lead forward, to something you might become. And once you've seen that possibility, the surface world never looks quite the same. My name is Patricia Nighthawk, and this is what really happened in Mammoth Cave in March of 1968. Make of it what you will. But if you're ever driving through Kentucky and you see signs for cave tours, remember my story. Some holes in the earth go deeper than you think. And sometimes what lives down there used to be people just like you. My name is Vincent Stormcrow, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. Most of that time I've worked in these Appalachian mountains, taking pictures of wildlife and keeping folks safe. I've seen black bears, wild turkeys, deer, and just about every other animal that lives in these woods. What I'm about to tell you happened at Blackwater Falls State Park in West Virginia, back in September of 1984. I never believed in Bigfoot. Never. All those blurry photos and crazy stories. I figured they were just people seeing bears and letting their imagination run wild. Hell, I'd taken thousands of photos in these mountains, and the only monsters I ever caught on film were the occasional angry raccoon. Blackwater Falls is one of the most beautiful places in West Virginia. The waterfall drops 57 feet into a gorge surrounded by thick hemlock trees. The water looks dark because of all the tannins from fallen leaves, which is how it got its name. In September, the place is packed with tourists wanting to see the fall colors. Red maples, yellow birches, orange oaks. It's like someone painted the whole mountainside. I was 41 then, divorced, with 2 kids I saw on weekends. My ex-wife said I loved the woods more than people. And maybe she was right. After the divorce, I threw myself into my work even more. Taking pictures became my way of staying sane. I had all the latest camera equipment, a Canon AE-1, telephoto lenses, even a special flash for night photography. The day everything changed started normal enough. I was checking the trails near the main falls, making sure the railings were secure and the paths were clear. Fall is our busiest season, and we can't afford to have someone slip and get hurt. I had my camera with me, like always, hoping to get some shots of the morning mist rising from the gorge. That's when I met the Bradley family. Jim Bradley was a big guy from Ohio, maybe 6'2", and built like a linebacker. His wife Sarah was quieter, and they had 2 kids, a boy about 8 and a girl maybe 10. They were setting up camp at one of the sites near the fall's overlook. "Excuse me, Ranger," Jim called out as I walked by. "We saw something weird last night." I stopped. Weird usually meant a bear had gotten into someone's food, or maybe they'd heard an owl and thought it was a ghost. "What kind of weird?" I asked. "We were sitting by the fire around 9 o'clock, Sarah said, keeping her voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. "Something big walked past our camp. I mean, really big." Jim nodded. At first I thought it was a bear standing on its back legs, but bears don't walk like that. This thing, it walked like a person, a really tall person. I'd heard this story 100 times. "How tall would you say?" 8, maybe 9 feet, Jim said. I got up to look, but it disappeared into the trees, didn't make a sound. "Bears can walk on their hind legs," I explained, "especially when they're curious about something, and the moonlight can play tricks on your eyes." But Sarah shook her head. "This wasn't a bear. Bears are round, you know. This thing had shoulders, big shoulders, and long arms." I asked them to show me where they'd seen it. We walked to the edge of their campsite where the forest got thick. I knelt down and looked for tracks, more to make them feel better than because I expected to find anything. That's when I saw the footprint. It was in a patch of soft mud near a small stream, 18 inches long, maybe 7 inches wide. Way too big for a human, wrong shape for a bear. I'd seen thousands of animal tracks in my career, and this didn't match anything I knew. "Holy shit," I whispered, then caught myself. Sorry, kids weren't around. I took out my measuring tape and camera. The print was clear as day. You could see individual toe marks, 5 toes just like a human, but massive and deep. Whatever made this track was heavy, really heavy. "You believe us now?" Jim asked. Didn't answer right away. I was too busy trying to figure out what I was looking at. The print was fresh, made sometime during the night when the mud was soft from dew. "I'm going to take some pictures and measurements," I said. and I want you folks to be extra careful. Keep your food locked up and don't wander off the trails after dark." "Is it dangerous?" Sarah asked. "Probably not," I lied. Truth was, I had no idea what we were dealing with. As I worked, I noticed something else that bothered me. The woods were too quiet. Usually in the morning you'd hear birds singing, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing. But there was nothing. Even the Bradley kids who'd been running around earlier were sitting still and quiet by their tent. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. I finished taking pictures and told the Bradleys I'd patrol the area more often. But as I walked back toward the ranger station, that footprint kept nagging at me. I'd been in these mountains for 16 years and I'd never seen anything like it. The old-timers around here sometimes told stories about wild men in the deep woods. The German settlers back in the 1700s had legends about huge, hairy creatures that lived in caves and only came out at night. I'd always figured those stories came from people who'd seen bears or maybe caught glimpses of hermits living rough in the mountains. But 18-inch footprints don't lie. That evening I developed the photos in the darkroom at the station. The prints came out clear and sharp. Whatever made those tracks walked upright and weighed at least 400 pounds, maybe more. I stared at the pictures for a long time, trying to come up with a rational explanation. I couldn't. The next morning I got the call I'd been dreading. "Ranger Stormcrow?" The voice on the radio belonged to Deputy Martinez from the Tucker County Sheriff's Department. "We need you at Campsite 12. We've got a situation." Campsite 12 was where the Bradley family had been staying. I drove there as fast as I could, my stomach twisted in knots. When I arrived, I saw 3 sheriff's cars and an ambulance. The Bradleys' tent was in shreds, scattered across the campsite like confetti. Their picnic table was flipped over, and their car had a dented roof with what looked like claw marks scratched deep into the metal. Deputy Martinez met me at the edge of the site. He was pale and looked like he hadn't slept. "Where's the family?" I asked. "Hospital," he said. "Sarah and the kids are okay, just scared. But Jim..." He shook his head. "Jim's hurt bad." "What happened?" Martinez pulled out his notebook, but his hands were shaking. "According to Sarah, something attacked their camp around midnight. She heard Jim yell, then a lot of crashing around. By the time she got out of the tent with the kids, Jim was on the ground and whatever did this was gone." I looked at the destroyed campsite. The tent hadn't just been torn. It had been ripped apart with incredible force. Sleeping bags were scattered everywhere and there was blood on the torn fabric. "Any idea what did this?" Martinez asked. I knelt down next to the picnic table. The claw marks were deep, cutting right through the metal like it was paper. I'd seen what bear claws could do, and this wasn't bears. The scratches were too wide, too deep. "I need to see Jim," I said. At the hospital, Sarah Bradley was sitting in the waiting room with her kids. She looked up when she saw me, and her eyes were red from crying. "How is he?" I asked. 3 broken ribs, punctured lung, and cuts all over his chest and back," she whispered. "The doctors say he'll live, but... Can you tell me what you saw?" She glanced at her kids, who were coloring in books a nurse had given them, trying to preet, and everything was normal. "Jim heard something moving around our car," she said quietly. "He went out to check, told me to stay in the tent with the kids. Then I heard him scream." "What kind of scream?" "The kind you make when something's trying to kill you." Her voice cracked. "I looked out and I saw... God, I don't know how to describe it. It was huge, covered in dark hair. It had Jim on the ground and it was hitting him." "How big?" 9 feet tall, maybe 10. Its arms were longer than a person's arm should be. And the smell..." She shuddered. "Like wet dog and rotting meat." "What happened next?" I screamed and turned on the flashlight. It looked at me for just a second, and then it ran off. But the way it looked at me, it had intelligence in its eyes. Like it was thinking. I stayed at the hospital until Jim was stable enough to talk. When I finally got into his room, he was wrapped in bandages and hooked up to machines, but he was conscious. "You were right," he said as soon as he saw me. "Should have listened when you told us to be careful. Tell me what you remember." I heard something messing with our car. Thought maybe it was a bear trying to get into the cooler we left in the back seat, so I grabbed my flashlight and went to check. He winced as he shifted position. When I got close, I could see something big moving around the car. I called out, "Hey, get out of there," thinking I'd scare it away. But it didn't run. It turned around and looked at me, and I knew right then I was in trouble. This wasn't any bear. It stood up on two legs, and it was tall as a basketball player, but twice as wide, covered in hair, arms like tree trunks. Jim closed his eyes, remembering. I should have run right then, but I was so shocked. I just stood there, and it smiled at me. Not a friendly smile, like it knew something I didn't. Then what? It charged, faster than anything that big should move. I tried to run, but it caught me in about 3 steps, hit me so hard I flew 10 feet and slammed into the picnic table. He touched the bandages on his chest. Then it was on top of me, clawing and hitting. I thought I was going to die. What made it stop? Sarah screamed and turned on that big flashlight we brought. The thing looked up, and I could see its face clearly. Almost human, but not. The jaw was too big, the forehead too heavy, and the eyes. He shivered. The eyes were smart, like it was deciding whether to kill me or not. But it left? Yeah. It stood up, looked at Sarah and the kids for a long moment, then just walked away. Didn't run, just walked off into the trees like it owned the place. I left the hospital with more questions than answers. Whatever was out there had attacked a family of tourists and nearly killed a man. And according to both Sarah and Jim, it was intelligent. That scared me more than anything else. Back at the park, I called my supervisor and reported the incident. I also called Dr. Helen Fairfax, the park naturalist who worked with me on wildlife surveys. If anyone would know what could have done this, it would be Helen. She arrived at the ranger station an hour later, carrying her field kit and looking skeptical. "So you're telling me we have a Bigfoot problem?" she said as I showed her the photos of the footprints and the destroyed campsite. "I'm telling you we have something that's big, strong, and dangerous," I replied, "and it's not afraid of humans." Helen studied the photos carefully. She had a PhD in zoology and 20 years of field experience. If anyone could debunk this, it would be her. "These footprints are interesting," she admitted. "The stride length suggests something around 8 to 9 feet tall. The depth indicates significant weight, and the toe pattern..." She looked up at me. "This doesn't match any known animal in this region." "So what do you think it is?" "I think we need to find more evidence before we start talking about unknowns on species," she said. But I could see the curiosity in her eyes. Helen loved a good mystery. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Jim had said, that the thing had smiled at him. Animals don't smile. They might bare their teeth as a threat, but they don't smile with intelligence and malice. Whatever was out there, it was still in my park, and now it had tasted blood. 2 days later, we found Dave Winters. Dave was a local poacher who'd been hunting illegally in the park for years. I'd caught him a few times and given him warnings, but he always came back. He knew these woods as well as I did, maybe better. A hiker found his body in a ravine about 2 miles from where the Bradley family had been attacked. When I got there with Deputy Martinez and the coroner, what we saw made my stomach turn. Dave had been crushed. That's the only way to describe it. His chest was caved in like something huge had stepped on him. But what really got my attention was the boulder next to his body, a rock the size of a washing machine that looked like it had been thrown from the ridge above. "Jesus," Martinez whispered. "What could throw something that big?" I looked up at the ridge. It was at least 50 feet above us. To throw a boulder that size, that distance, would take incredible strength. "Any idea why he was here?" the coroner asked. I found Dave's rifle about 20 feet away. It had been fired. I could smell the gunpowder, but the barrel was twisted into a pretzel, like someone had grabbed it and wrung it out like a washcloth. "He was hunting," I said, "and I think he found something." The coroner ruled it an accidental death. "Rock slide," he said. But I knew better. Rocks don't fall upward. and they don't twist rifle barrels into knots. That evening, Dr. Fairfax and I went back to the site where we'd found the footprints. I brought camping gear and my best camera equipment. If something was out there, I wanted proof. We set up camp in a clearing about a quarter-mile from the main trail, close enough to get help if we needed it, but far enough from the tourist areas that we wouldn't be disturbed. Helen brought motion sensors and night vision equipment from the university. "You know this is crazy, right?" she said as we pitched our tent. "Probably," I admitted. "But people are getting hurt. I need to know what we're dealing with." As the sun went down, the forest around us grew quiet again. That same unnatural silence I'd noticed before. No birds, no insects, no small animals moving through the brush. "Do you hear that?" Helen asked around 10 o'clock. "I don't hear anything." Exactly. The forest is dead quiet. That's not normal. We sat by our small camp stove, listening to the silence. Every now and then, I thought I heard something moving in the trees around us. But when I turned on my flashlight, there was nothing there. Around midnight, Helen's motion sensors started going off. The first alarm came from the sensor we'd placed on the trail leading to our camp, then another from the south side of the clearing, then a third from the north. "It's circling us," Helen whispered. I grabbed my camera and the high-powered flashlight. "Stay close to the tent," I told her. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the clearing, maybe 30 yards away, something huge moved between the trees. I caught just a glimpse, massive shoulders, long arms, and a shape that was almost human but wrong in every way. "There!" I pointed and turned on the flashlight. The beam caught it for just a second. 9 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair with a face that looked like someone had crossed a gorilla with a man. It turned to look at us, and its eyes reflected the light like an animal's. But there was intelligence in those eyes. Cold, calculating intelligence. I raised my camera and started taking pictures, the flash firing again and again. The creature didn't run. It just stood there, watching us, like it was trying to decide what to do. "Helen, are you getting this?" I called out. But when I looked back, Helen was gone. I spun around, searching with my flashlight. "Helen! Helen! Where are you?" I heard her scream from somewhere in the trees to my left. It was cut short, like something had covered her mouth. When I turned back to where the creature had been standing, it was gone too. I grabbed my rifle and ran toward where I'd heard Helen scream, crashing through the underbrush with my flashlight sweeping back and forth. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. "Helen!" I called. "Helen, where are you?" I found her about 100 yards from our camp, sitting against a tree. She was conscious but shaking like a leaf. "Are you hurt?" I asked, kneeling beside her. I don't think so," she said. "It grabbed me from behind and carried me here. Then it just let me go." "Carried you? How?" "Like I weighed nothing. One arm around my waist and my feet weren't even touching the ground." She looked up at me with wide eyes. "Vincent, I saw its face up close. It's not an animal. Not entirely." "What do you mean?" "The bone structure, the way it moves, even the way it looked at me. It's like someone crossed a human with something else, something that was never meant to exist." I helped Helen back to our camp, but we didn't sleep that night. We sat with our backs to the tent, watching the tree line with our weapons ready. Every few minutes I thought I saw movement in the shadows, but nothing came close enough to be sure. When the sun finally came up, we found something that made everything worse. At the edge of our campsite, pressed into the soft earth, was a perfect handprint. But it wasn't the right size or shape for a human hand. The fingers were too long, the palm too wide. And next to it, scratched into the bark of a nearby tree, was a symbol that looked almost like writing. "It's trying to communicate," Helen said. "Or it's marking territory," I replied. "Either way, we're in over our heads." We packed up camp and drove back to the ranger stati, on in silence. I had the photos developed that afternoon, and when I saw them, I knew our lives had just changed forever. The pictures were clear and sharp. Whatever I'd photographed was real, solid, and definitely not a bear or any other known animal. It was a creature that shouldn't exist, but there it was on film. "What do we do now?" Helen asked. "We find out what else is out there," I said, "because I don't think that thing is alone." That night, I got another call. Pete Kowalski, a local hunter, had been found dead near the old mining trail. His neck was broken, and his body had been arranged in the same symbol we'd seen carved into the tree. Whatever was in these mountains was getting bolder, and it was sending us a message. The symbol Pete's body had been arranged in matched the one we'd found carved into the tree. Helen spent hours going through books and online databases trying to find out what it meant. "I think it's a warning," she said, showing me her research. "Similar symbols have been reported in other cryptid encounters. It usually means stay away or this is mine." But I couldn't stay away. 3 people had been hurt or killed, and whatever was doing this was still out there. I had a responsibility to protect the people who came to this park. Helen and I went back out the next night, but this time we brought backup. I'd convinced 2 other rangers, Mike Chen and Bobby Rodriguez, to come with us. I didn't tell them exactly what we might find. They probably wouldn't have believed me anyway. We set up a larger camp deeper in the woods near a series of caves that Helen had found on the old geological survey maps. If something that big was living in the area, it would need shelter. "Why are we really out here, Vince?" Mike asked as we set up motion sensors around the perimeter. "I mean, what kind of bear needs 4 armed rangers to track it?" I was about to answer when Bobby called out from near the cave entrance. "Hey, you guys need to see this!" We followed him into the cave mouth. Our flashlights revealed a space much larger than I'd expected, with tunnels leading deeper into the mountain. But what got our attention were the bones scattered around the cave floor. Deer bones, bear bones, and some that looked disturbingly human. "What the hell kind of animal lives like this?" Mike whispered. That's when we heard it. A low, rumbling sound coming from deeper in the cave system. Not quite a growl, not quite a voice, but something in between. "We should leave," Bobby said, backing toward the entrance. "Whatever lives here, we don't want to meet it in its own home." But as we turned to go, something stepped out of the shadows and blocked our exit. It was bigger than the one I'd seen before, 10 feet tall at least, with shoulders broad enough to fill the cave mouth. This one was darker, more scarred, and when it looked at us, I could see years of intelligence and cunning in its eyes. "Nobody move," I whispered. "Don't do anything threatening." But Mike panicked. He raised his rifle and fired, the sound echoing through the cave like thunder. The bullet hit the creature in the shoulder, spinning it around but not dropping it. Instead of running, it threw back its head and let out a roar that shook the cave walls. Then it charged. What happened next was chaos. The creature moved faster than something that big should be able to move. It grabbed Mike and threw him against the cave wall with a sickening crack. Bobby tried to run but tripped over the scattered bones. I had a clear shot, but something made me hesitate. This wasn't just an animal defending itself. This was a thinking being protecting its home. "Wait," I shouted, holding up my hands. "We're leaving! We're leaving!" The creature stopped and looked at me. For a moment, we stared at each other in the flickering light of our dropped flashlights. Then, incredibly, it stepped aside. I helped Bobby to his feet. Mike was unconscious but breathing, and we backed slowly toward the cave entrance. The creature watched us go but didn't follow. Once we were outside, I called for an ambulance and got Mike to the hospital. His arm was broken, and he had a concussion, but he'd live. More importantly, he agreed to keep quiet about what we'd seen. "That thing could have killed all of us," he said. Why didn't it? I'd been wondering the same thing. The next day, Helen and I went back to the cave, but we didn't go inside. Instead, we waited at a safe distance and watched. Around sunset, we saw something that changed everything. The big male came out of the cave first, moving slowly and favoring its wounded shoulder. Behind it came a female, slightly smaller but still massive, and behind her came something that made my heart stop. A young one. Maybe 4 feet tall, covered in lighter brown fur, moving with the awkward gait of something still learning to walk upright. "My God," Helen whispered. "It's a family." We watched as the adults foraged for food while keeping the young one close. They communicated with gestures and low sounds that weren't quite language but weren't animal noises either. They were careful, intelligent, and protective of their child. These weren't monsters. They were just trying to survive. "We can't let anyone else know about this," I told Helen. "If word gets out, this place will be overrun with hunters and researchers. They'll be captured or killed." "But what about the attacks? That man who was hurt?" I thought about it. Jim Bradley got too close to their territory. Dave Winters was hunting in their area with a gun. Pete Kowalski, I don't know. Maybe he stumbled onto something he shouldn't have. So they were defending themselves? Or they're young. Think about it. September is when most animals teach their offspring to hunt and forage. They'd be more territorial, more protective. We watched the Appalachian Millie for another hour before they disappeared back into the cave. As they left, the big male looked in our direction one last time. There was no hostility in its gaze now, just a kind of weary acceptance. It knew we knew. And it was trusting us to keep their secret. That was 25 years ago, and I've kept my word. Mike Chen transferred to a different park and never talked about what happened. Bobby Rodriguez left the Park Service entirely and moved to Florida. Dr. Helen Fairfax continued her research, but she never published anything about what we found. And me? I stayed. I spent the rest of my career quietly protecting that family and others like them. Because there are others. Over the years, I've found evidence of at least 3 different groups living in the remote areas of the park. They move seasonally, stay away from the popular trails, and do their best to avoid human contact. I've seen the young one we found that night grow up and have children of its own. I've watched as the old male grew grayer and slower, eventually passing away peacefully one winter. I've documented their behavior, their intelligence, and their complex social structure. They're not animals, but they're not human either. There's something in between, something that's managed to survive in these mountains for centuries by staying hidden. The official reports from 1984 list the incidents as bear attacks. The deaths were ruled accidental. As far as the public knows, Blackwater Falls is just another beautiful state park where nothing unusual ever happens. But I know better. And now, so do you. These mountains are older than we are, and they hold secrets we're not meant to understand. The creatures I've been protecting all these years are just one of those secrets. They've learned to coexist with humans by staying invisible, and as long as we respect their territory, they respect ours. Every now and then, some tourist claims to have seen something impossible in the woods. A dark shape walking upright between the trees. Footprints that don't match any known animal. Strange. Sounds in the night that don't belong to any creature in the guidebooks. When that happens, I do my job. I investigate. I take their statement. I look at their blurry photos and listen to their stories. Then I file a report that explains everything rationally and safely, because some things are more important than the truth. Some secrets need to be kept. I'm retired now, but I still visit the park. I still hike the remote trails and check on the families I've been protecting. They know me, and I think they trust me. Sometimes, if I'm very still and very quiet, I can watch them from a distance as they go about their lives. They're magnificent creatures, intelligent, social, and surprisingly gentle when they're not threatened. They have their own culture, their own ways of communicating, their own understanding of the world that's completely different from ours. And they're dying out. Slowly but surely, as the wilderness shrinks and human development creeps closer to their territories, their numbers are dwindling. The family I first encountered now has only one surviving member, a female who lives alone in the deepest part of the cave system. Someday soon there won't be any left, and the world will be a smaller, less mysterious place because of it. But for now, they're still here, still surviving, still keeping to the shadows and the deep woods where most people never go. If you ever visit Blackwater Falls, stick to the marked trails. Don't wander off alone, especially at night. And if you see something impossible moving through the trees, something that shouldn't exist but does, don't take pictures, don't tell anyone. Just walk away quietly and let them be. Some things in these mountains deserve our respect more than our curiosity. And some secrets are worth keeping, even if it means the world never knows how truly wonderful and strange it really is, the beast of bliss. Blackwater Falls is still out there, but it's not a beast at all. It's just trying to survive in a world that has no place for it anymore. And And that, more than anything else, is the real horror story. My name is Samuel Eagleclaw, and I've been pulling people off these cliffs for 17 years. When folks get in trouble on Seneca Rocks, they call me. I know every crack, every ledge, every loose stone on this 900-foot wall of limestone that rises up from the West Virginia valleys like a giant's finger pointing at the sky. Most people think mountain rescue is all about being brave. That's wrong. It's about being careful, checking your ropes twice, testing every anchor point, never taking chances when someone's life is hanging by a thread, literally. The old Seneca people who lived here first, they called this place where the spirits watch from above. My grandmother told me that story when I was young, back when I thought it was just something old folks said to make children behave. She was part Seneca, part something else, but she knew the old ways. Used to point up at those cliffs and say the great birds still lived up there, watching over sacred ground. I laughed at those stories then. After the war, after learning to climb on real mountains in Korea, after coming home and spending years hauling tourists out of trouble, I figured I knew what was real and what wasn't. Birds were birds. Big ones were hawks or eagles, giant birds that could carry off grown men. That was just old stories, the kind of thing people made up when they didn't understand the world yet. It was late August 1956 when everything changed. Perfect climbing weather, the kind that brings people from 3 states away to test themselves against our rock. The morning started like any other rescue call. "Sam, we got 4 climbers overdue from yesterday," Sheriff Morrison told me over the radio. "Experienced party from Pittsburgh. Should have been down by dark." I loaded my gear into the old Ford pickup. Hemp ropes, steel pitons, the block and tackle system for hauling people up or down the cliff face. Everything had its place, everything tested and retested. In mountain rescue, sloppy gear gets people killed. The climb to the base of the main face took an hour through thick forest. Birds should have been singing. Squirrels should have been chattering in the oak trees. Instead, the woods felt empty, like even the smallest creatures had found somewhere else to be. I'd climbed these trails thousands of times, but something felt wrong. The air itself seemed to be holding its breath. At the base of the cliff, I found their camp. 4 sleeping bags laid out neat and tidy, coffee pots still sitting on cold ashes. Everything normal, except the people were gone, and their climbing gear was scattered across 100 yards of forest floor like someone had thrown it from the top of the cliff. That didn't make sense. Climbers don't abandon good equipment. A hemp rope cost more than most folks made in a week. Steel pitons were worth their weight in silver. You don't just throw that stuff around. I called up to Jake Morrison, my climbing partner for the last 5 years. Jake was Sheriff Morrison's nephew, a solid guy who knew the rock almost as well as I did. "Jake, bring your binoculars up here. Something's not right about this setup." While I waited for Jake, I studied the scattered gear. A 100-foot rope had been cut clean in half, but not by any knife. The ends looked torn, like something with incredible strength had just ripped it apart. Pitons were bent into impossible shapes. One carabiner had been twisted into a figure 8. What kind of force could do that to solid steel? Jake arrived breathing hard, sweat on his face despite the cool morning air. "Sam, you see anything strange on your way up?" "Besides the equipment graveyard? No? Why?" "Birds," he said, scanning the cliff face with his binoculars. "Haven't seen a single bird since I left the truck. No H. Auks, no crows, nothing. Even the vultures are gone." He was right. In all my years on this mountain, I'd never seen the cliff face empty of birds. Hawks nested in the high cracks. Crows roosted on the ledges. Something had cleared them out, and whatever it was, they weren't coming back. "Let's gear up," I told Jake. "Those climbers are up there somewhere, and they're going to need help getting down." We roped up using the traditional 3-point anchor system, pitons driven deep into cracks in the solid limestone. I'd made this climb hundreds of times, but today felt different. The rock seemed to vibrate under my hands like something huge was moving around up there. 50 feet up the main face, we found the first sign of the missing climbers. A boot, expensive leather, still laced tight. It was wedged into a crack like someone had kicked it off in a hurry, but the crack was barely 3 inches wide. Nobody takes off a boot and jams it that deep into solid rock. "Sam," Jake called from 20 feet to my left. "You need to see this." I swung over on a pendulum move, something I'd done 1,000 times before. But when I reached Jake's position, I forgot everything I knew about climbing. There, carved deep into the limestone, were claw marks. 4 parallel grooves, each one as long as my forearm, cut into rock that was millions of years old. "What the hell could make marks like that?" Jake whispered. I ran my fingers along the grooves. They were fresh, maybe a day old. Whatever made them had claws like steel knives and the strength to carve solid stone. I'd seen bear claws on trees, eagle claws on dead fish, but this was something else entirely. These marks came from something big enough to grab a full-grown man and strong enough to leave permanent scars in limestone. We kept climbing. At 200 feet, we found another boot. This one had blood on it. At 300 feet, we found pieces of torn clothing hanging from the stone like prayer flags. That's when our radios started acting up. "Jake, you copy?" Nothing but static. I tried the emergency FM frequency. Still nothing but a harsh, screeching sound that made my teeth hurt. "Sam, look up." I tilted my head back and saw something that made my stomach drop. A shadow was passing across the cliff face above us, but there were no clouds in the sky. The shadow was huge, with a shape that didn't match anything that should be flying over West Virginia. It had wings, but wings longer than a small airplane, and it was circling. "That's impossible," I said, more to myself than to Jake. "Tell that to the missing climbers." We kept moving up, but now every shadow made us freeze. Every sound echoed off the rock in ways that played tricks with our minds. At 400 feet, we reached a large ledge where climbers usually stopped to rest and eat lunch. What we found there changed everything. Bill Stevens was sitting with his back against the cliff wall, his expensive camera still hanging around his neck. At first glance, he looked like he was just taking a break, enjoying the view of the valley spread out below. But Bill Stevens had been dead for hours. There wasn't a mark on him, no cuts, no broken bones, no sign of a fall. He just looked tired, like he'd decided to sit down and rest and never got back up. But his face was locked in an expression of pure terror, his eyes wide open, staring up at the empty sky. "Heart attack?" Jake suggested, but his voice was shaking. I knelt down next to Bill and checked his pulse just to be sure. His skin was cold but not stiff yet. Maybe 6 hours dead, which put his death right around dawn. I started to close his eyes when I saw something that made my hands freeze. In the stone wall behind Bill's head, there were more claw marks, fresh ones, deep ones, and they formed a pattern around where his head had been resting, like something with enormous talons had been holding him against the rock while he died of fright. "We need to get off this cliff," Jake said, "right now." But before we could start rappelling down, the shadow passed over us again. This time it was lower, close enough that we could hear the sound of massive wings beating the air. The wind from those wings nearly tore us off the ledge. I looked up and saw it clearly for the first time. It had the shape of a bird, but it was bigger than anything that should be able to fly. Its wingspan had to be 40 feet across, maybe more. Golden brown feathers caught the sunlight as it wheeled overhead, and when it turned its head to look down at us, I saw eyes like molten gold, intelligent and ancient and full of rage. "Thunderbird," I whispered, remembering my grandmother's stories. The creature let out a cry that shook loose stones from the cliff face. It wasn't the scream of an eagle or the caw of a crow. It was something deeper, older, like the sound of wind rushing through caves that had never seen sunlight. Then it dove. Jake had just enough time to scream before talons the size of railroad spikes closed around his shoulders. I heard his safety rope snap like a guitar string as the creature lifted him off the ledge. For a moment, he was silhouetted against the sky, arms and legs kicking helplessly, and then they were both gone, disappearing over the top of the cliff formation. I pressed myself against the rock wall and tried not to breathe. Bill Stevens sat dead beside me, his camera pointing up at the empty sky where my climbing partner had vanished. Somewhere in the distance I could hear Jake screaming, but the sound was getting farther away. I was alone on a ledge 400 feet above the ground, with a creature out of legend hunting me from above. For 10 minutes, I didn't move, didn't breathe hard, didn't make a sound. I just pressed myself against that cold limestone and listened to the wind whistling through the cracks in the rock. The creature was up there somewhere, waiting. My climbing rope was still good, anchored to solid pitons driven deep into the cliff face. I could rappel down, get off this mountain, and never. Our comeback. Tell the sheriff that Jake had fallen, that the missing climbers had made a mistake and paid for it. Nobody would question Samuel Eagleclaw's word about what happened on a mountain. But I couldn't stop thinking about Jake's scream getting farther away instead of stopping suddenly. That meant he was still alive when that thing carried him off. Still alive and needing help. I started climbing again, this time staying close to the rock face, moving from shadow to shadow. At 500 feet, I found more evidence of the missing climbers. A backpack wedged into a chimney crack, its contents scattered across a narrow ledge. Food cans punctured by something sharp. A water bottle crushed flat. And everywhere, more of those claw marks in the stone. At 600 feet, I heard voices. Help! Somebody help us! The call came from above and to the north, from a section of the cliff I'd only climbed once before. It was a difficult route, nearly vertical, with few handholds and lots of loose rock. Not the kind of place you'd expect to find living climbers. Jake, I called back. Sam, thank God, we're trapped up here. That was Jake's voice, but it sounded wrong, strained, like he was trying not to scream. I followed the sound, climbing a series of narrow cracks that led up and around the north face. It took me 20 minutes to reach the source of the voices, and what I found there will haunt me until the day I die. There was a ledge about 15 feet wide and maybe 6 feet deep, carved into the cliff face like a natural balcony. On that ledge were Jake and two of the missing climbers, a man and a woman I didn't recognize. They were alive, but they weren't free. The ledge was a nest. It was built from tree branches, thick as my waist, woven together with strips of bark and held in place by what looked like dried mud. But when I got closer, I realized the mud was actually guano, bird droppings accumulated over years, maybe decades, and scattered throughout the nest were bones, not bird bones, human bones, rib cages, skulls, arm and leg bones picked, clean and bleached white by the sun. Some looked fresh, others were old enough that they'd started to crumble. Sam, you have to get us out of here, Jake whispered when he saw me. That thing, it's not natural. It's been collecting people. The woman, maybe 30 years old with short blonde hair, was sitting against the back wall of the nest, holding her left arm against her body. It broke my wrist when it grabbed me, she said. My name's Carol. That's my husband, Tom. Tom was unconscious, a large bandage around his head made from torn clothing. Concussion, Jake explained. He's been out since yesterday. What about the fourth climber? I asked. Carol looked down at the bones scattered around us. Mary didn't make it. That thing dropped her right here in the nest and... She couldn't finish the sentence. I looked around the ledge, trying to figure out how to get 3 people down 600 feet of vertical rock face, 2 of them injured. My rope was long enough, but I'd need multiple trips, and that assumed the creature didn't come back while I was working. Jake, can you climb? My shoulder's messed up, but I can manage a rappel if you set it up right. I was driving pitons into the back wall of the nest when we heard it coming back. The sound of those massive wings beating the air echoed off the cliff walls like thunder. We all pressed against the rock and tried to make ourselves invisible. The creature landed on the outer edge of the nest with a thud that shook the entire ledge. Up close, it was even more terrifying than I'd imagined. Its body was easily 12 feet long, covered in golden brown feathers that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Its head was like an eagle's head, but scaled up to impossible size, with a beak that could snap a man in half and eyes that held an intelligence that was definitely not animal. It looked at us for a long moment, tilting, its head like it was trying to decide what to do with us. Then it opened its beak, and let out another one of those ancient cries that seemed to shake the mountain itself. That's when I saw the second one. It rose up from below the ledge like something out of a nightmare, wings spread wide, talons extended. This one was even bigger than the first, with scars across its chest and head that spoke of battles fought and won over many years. The two creatures began to communicate, making sounds like wind and thunder and the crash of falling rocks. They were talking about us, I realized, deciding our fate. "Sam," Jake whispered, "I think they're a mating pair. This is their territory." The larger bird, what I guessed was the male, spread its wings and took off again. But the female stayed on the ledge, watching us with those golden eyes. She was guarding her nest, making sure her prizes didn't escape before feeding time. I had to do something. In an hour, maybe two, the sun would start to go down. And I had a feeling that when darkness fell, these creatures would be ready for dinner. That's when I remembered my grandmother's stories. Not just about the thunderbirds, but about how to deal with them. The old ways, the respectful ways. If these were truly the ancient guardians my grandmother had told me about, then maybe there was a chance. A slim chance, but better than waiting to become bird food. I started to sing. It was an old song, one my grandmother had taught me when I was barely old enough to walk. A Seneca song about respect for the spirits of the high places, about asking permission to walk on sacred ground. The creature's head snapped toward me, those golden eyes fixed on my face. It listened to the song with what looked like surprise, then something that might have been recognition. When I finished, the silence stretched out like a held breath. Then the creature did. It's something that nearly made me fall off the ledge. It bowed its head. The thunderbird looked at me with those ancient golden eyes, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not just intelligence, but wisdom, pain, and maybe, just maybe, a willingness to listen. I kept my voice low and steady the way my grandmother had taught me to speak to wild things. "Great one, we didn't know this was your sacred place. We came here with respect, but maybe we didn't show it the right way." The creature tilted its massive head, listening. "These people," I gestured to Jake and the two injured climbers, "they didn't come to hurt anything. They just wanted to touch the sky, to feel what it's like to be up high where you live. But they didn't know the old rules." Carol was staring at me like I'd lost my mind, talking to a giant bird like it could understand every word. But Jake, he knew me better. He'd heard me tell the old stories around campfires. He stayed quiet and let me work. My grandmother, she was Seneca. She told me about the great birds who watch over the sacred places. She said you were here long before the white men came, long before anyone built roads or towns. This is your home, and we're just visitors. The thunderbird made a sound deep in its throat, not the terrible cry from before, but something softer, almost like it was considering my words. But these people, they have families, children waiting for them to come home. If you let them go, I promise they'll tell others about this place, about the need to show respect. They'll make sure people understand this mountain is special. For a moment I thought I'd gotten through. The creature seemed to relax, its wings folding against its sides. Then we heard the male returning, that thunderous beating of wings that announced his approach. He landed on the ledge with a crash that sent loose stones tumbling into the valley below. This one was bigger, scarred, and definitely not interested in conversation. He looked at me, then at the others, and I could see the hunger in his eyes. The female made a sough, rees of soft sounds, trying to communicate what had just happened. But the male wasn't listening. He spread his wings wide, a display of dominance and power, and let out a cry that made my ears ring. Then he lunged at Carol. I don't remember making the decision to move. 1 second I was pressed against the rock wall, the next I was throwing myself between the creature and the injured woman. The thunderbird's talons raked across my back, tearing through my heavy work shirt and the skin beneath. I felt like I'd been hit by a falling tree. But the attack stopped. The male bird pulled back, looking confused. Not because he couldn't kill me easily, but because I'd done something he didn't expect. I'd put myself between him and his prey. "Wait," I said, blood running down my back. There's another way. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something I'd carried for 17 years but never used. A small leather pouch my grandmother had given me before she died, filled with tobacco and sage and other things from the old country. This is an offering, I told both creatures, from the Seneca people to the guardians of the high places, a gift of respect. I opened the pouch and scattered its contents on the floor of the nest. The smell of sage filled the air, sharp and clean and somehow sacred. Both thunderbirds stepped back, their heads lowered. We'll leave your mountain, I continued. All of us. And we'll make sure others know this place is protected, but not through fear, through respect. The male bird looked at the scattered offering, then at his mate. They began to communicate again, those strange sounds like wind and thunder. But this time, the tone was different. They were discussing something, weighing options. Finally, the female stepped forward. She looked directly into my eyes, and I felt like she was seeing all the way down into my soul, judging me, measuring, the truth of my words. Then she did something that nearly stopped my heart. She reached out with one massive talon and gently touched the medicine pouch in my hands. It was a sign of acceptance. The male wasn't happy about it. He paced back and forth on the ledge, making agitated sounds. But when his mate fixed him with a stern look, he settled down. Even among thunderbirds, it seemed, the females had the final say about the nest. "Jake," I said quietly, "start rigging the rappel. We're leaving." It took us an hour to get everyone ready. Carol's broken wrist made it hard for her to hold onto the rope, so Jake had to rappel down with her in a special harness. Tom was still unconscious, which meant I had to lower him like a sack of grain, controlling his descent from above. The whole time, both thunderbirds watched us work. They didn't help, but they didn't interfere either. They just observed, like they wanted to make sure we kept our word about leaving their mountain alone. When it was my turn to rappel down, I looked back one more time at the ancient nest with its scattered bones and strange architecture. The female thunderbird was still there, watching me with those golden eyes. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. She bowed her head once, a gesture of mutual respect between guardians of the mountain. Then I was rappelling down 600 feet of vertical rock, my back on fire from the claw marks, my mind trying to process what had just happened. By the time I reached the ground, the sun was setting behind the peaks, painting the sky the color of old blood. That was 3 months ago. Carol and Tom recovered from their injuries and went back to Pittsburgh, but not before telling everyone who would listen about the need to respect wild places. Jake took a job with the Forest Service, working to establish protected areas in the mountain wilderness. And me? I'm still here, still pulling people off these cliffs when they get in trouble. But now I tell them different stories around the campfire at night. Stories about the old guardians, about the need to ask permission before walking on sacred ground. Most folks think I'm just sharing colorful local folklore. They smile and nod and figure it's part of the mountain experience. But some of them, the ones who really listen, they understand there's truth in the old stories. The official report listed Jake's rescue as a successful technical operation involving 4 climbers trapped by equipment failure. Bill Stevens' death was ruled accidental, caused by exposure and exhaustion. The missing climbing gear was attributed to rockfall and high winds. Nobody mentioned giant birds or sacred nests or ancient guardians. That's how these things work. The world likes its mysteries to have logical explanations, even when the truth is staring it in the face with golden eyes. But I know what I saw up there, and sometimes when the light is just right and the wind is blowing from the north, I can see them circling high above the cliff faces, 2 dark shapes against the sky. The thunderbirds of Seneca rocks, still watching over their territory, still protecting the sacred places from those who would take without asking. The climbing routes on the north face have been officially closed, marked as unstable due to rockfall danger. That was my recommendation to the Forest Service, and they accepted it without question. Samuel Eagleclaw's word carries weight in these mountains. Sometimes I get calls from climbers who want to attempt those restricted routes. They offer money, promise to be careful, swear they understand the risks. I always tell them the same thing. Some places aren't meant to be conquered. Some places are meant to be respected. A few weeks ago, a young photographer from the city called, said he'd heard stories about giant birds nesting in the cliffs. Wanted to get pictures, maybe sell them to National Geographic. I told him those were just old legends, the kind of stories mountain people tell to scare tourists. But I also told him about the equipment failures that happen on the North Face, the radio problems, the way the weather can change without warning, the rockfall that comes down like thunder even on clear days. He decided to try his luck somewhere else. My grandmother always said the spirits of the high places would return when the world needed them most. She said they'd been sleeping, waiting for the right time to wake up and remind people about the old ways, the respectful ways. Looking around at what we've done to the land, the way we take and take without giving back, I think maybe that time has come. The Thunderbirds of Seneca Rocks aren't the only old guardians stirring. I've heard stories from other mountains, other wild places where the rules are changing and the price of disrespect is getting higher. People think they've conquered nature, that technology and equipment and human cleverness can overcome anything. But up there on those cliffs, surrounded by bones and ancient wisdom, I learned something different. I learned that some things are bigger than us, older than us, and worthy of our respect. The Thunderbirds are still watching from above, and as long as people remember to ask permission before walking on sacred ground, to show respect for the spirits of the high places, we can share this mountain in peace. But for those who come with arrogance, who take without asking, who treat the sacred as just another place to be conquered, well, the nest is still there, and it's always hungry. My name is Samuel Eagleclaw, and I'm still pulling people off these cliffs. But now I know I'm not the only guardian watching over Seneca Rocks. Some guardians have badges and rescue equipment. Others have wings that span 40 feet and eyes like molten gold. And that's a truth I'll carry with me until the day I die. My name is Joshua Whitefeather, and I've been a forest ranger in these West Virginia mountains for 13 years. Cherokee blood runs through my veins, though I never paid much mind to the old stories my grandmother used to tell. She'd warn me about things that lived deep in the hollows, creatures she called bone eaters. I always figured that was just old-time superstition. I was wrong. It was late October 1963 when everything changed. The leaves had turned that deep red color they get right before winter sets in, and there was frost on the ground most mornings. Hunting season was in full swing, which meant my phone rang constantly with folks getting lost or hurt in the woods. Turkey Run Hollow was my territory, 40 miles of the roughest, most isolated forest in the Monongahela. I'd been working that sector since I started ranging, and I knew every tree, every stream, every cave. The hollow got its name from all the wild turkeys that used to roost there, but they'd been gone for years. Most animals avoided the place, actually. I should have paid attention to that. I'd saved 23 people from cave systems over the years. Got certified in cave rescue after my wife Sarah died in a mine collapse back in '58. Figured if I couldn't save her, maybe I could save somebody else. The caves in Turkey Run were part of a massive limestone system that ran for miles underground. Some passages were big enough to drive a truck through, others so narrow you had to crawl on your belly. Cherokee used them for burials hundreds of years ago, and settlers went missing in those caves back in the 1890s. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 6 men from Morgantown had been hunting in Turkey Run for 3 days. They were supposed to check in with the local sheriff Monday night, but nobody had heard from them. Their wives were worried sick. Probably just having too good a time to... "Remember to call home," Sheriff Coleman told me over the radio. "But their families are raising hell. Can you take a look?" I loaded up my truck with the usual gear: rope, first aid kit, flares, my old carbide headlamp. The temperature was dropping fast, and if those boys were hurt somewhere, they wouldn't last long in the cold. The drive to their camp took 2 hours over logging roads that were more like deer paths. 15 miles from the nearest real road with no way to radio for help once you got down in the hollow. That's how these mountains were, beautiful and deadly at the same time. I found their camp right where they'd said it would be, next to Turkey Run Creek. 6 tents set up neat and orderly, a fire pit with cold ashes, coolers full of food that hadn't been touched. Everything looked normal, except the men were gone. Their hunting licenses were still clipped to the registration board. Coffee was still in the pot, stone cold. Sleeping bags were laid out like they'd planned to come back. But there were no men anywhere. I called out their names: Tom Bradley, Mike Patterson, Jim Oakley, Steve Morris, Danny Wright, and Bob Fletcher. My voice echoed off the limestone cliffs that surrounded the hollow. Nothing answered back. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The woods were completely silent. No birds, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. In 13 years of ranging, I'd never heard silence like that. Then I saw the tracks. The tracks started at the edge of camp and led toward the main cave entrance about half a mile up the hollow. But these weren't normal tracks. They looked like something had been dragged. Long scrape marks in the dirt, broken branches, disturbed leaves. 6 different trails, all heading in the same direction. I followed them with my German shepherd, Rex, who'd been with me on dozens of rescues. But when we got close to the cave mouth, Rex started whining and backing away. The hair on his neck stood up like he'd seen a snake. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked. But he wouldn't go any closer. Dogs have better senses than people, and Rex had never been afraid of caves before. The entrance to Turkey Run Cave was like a huge mouth in the limestone cliff, maybe 15 feet high and 20 feet wide. I'd been inside dozens of times over the years, mapping the passages and checking for unstable areas. But today, something felt different. I lit my carbide lamp and stepped inside. The familiar smell of wet rock and bat droppings hit me, but there was something else underneath. Something sweet and rotten that I couldn't place. "Hello?" I called out. "Tom, Mike, anyone in here?" My voice bounced off the cave walls and disappeared into the darkness. But this time, something bounced back. Not quite an echo, more like my own voice being played back to me by someone else. "Hello? Anyone in here?" The words came from deep in the cave, but they sounded wrong, like someone was copying the way I talked but didn't quite get it right. I followed the main passage for about 50 yards until it split into 3 tunnels. The drag marks continued down the middle passage, the one that led to the deepest parts of the cave system. I'd only been down that way once before, years ago, and I remembered it went on for miles. That's when I heard the sound. It started soft, like branches creaking in the wind, but we were deep underground where no wind could reach. As I listened, it got louder and more rhythmic. Crack, 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 like someone breaking kindling for a fire, but bigger. Much bigger. The sound was coming from ahead where the drag marks led. I should have turned around right then, should have gone back for help. But those 6 men were down there somewhere, and every minute counted. The passage sloped downward and got narrower. My lamp beam cut through the darkness, but it seemed weaker than usual, like the darkness was fighting back. The walls were covered with old Cherokee symbols, spirals and animal shapes carved into the rock. Grandmother's stories came back to me, warnings about places where the spirits of the dead couldn't rest. The cracking sound got louder as I went deeper, and now I could hear something else, a low humming, like someone singing with their mouth closed. The passage opened into a large chamber I'd never seen before. My lamp beam played across the walls, and what I saw made my blood freeze. Bones. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They covered the floor like fallen leaves, white and gleaming in the lamplight. Leg bones, arm bones, ribs, skulls, all arranged in neat piles along the walls. Some looked old, like they'd been there for decades. Others looked fresh. And in the center of the chamber, I saw them. 6 men, alive but broken. They were arranged in a circle, their arms and legs bent at impossible angles. They were breathing, but their eyes were empty and staring. Tom Bradley's mouth moved like he was trying to speak, but only a thin whistle came out. The humming was coming from them. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, careful steps on the rocky floor. "Josh?" A familiar voice called out. "Josh? Is that you?" I turned around and saw Dale Somerville, my partner from the ranger station. He was carrying a flashlight and smiling like nothing in the world was wrong. "Dale, thank God you're here. We need to get these men to a hospital right now. Their bones are all broken, but they're still alive." Dale walked closer, his flashlight beam steady and bright. "Don't worry about them, Josh. They're exactly where they're supposed to be." Something in his voice made me step backward. In 13 years of working together, I'd never heard Dale talk like that. His words were too careful, like he was reading from a script. "We need to call for help," I said. "Get a medical team down here." "No," Dale said, still smiling. "We don't need any help at all." He took another step forward, and his flashlight beam hit his face. What I saw there made me understand why Rex wouldn't come into the cave. It looked like Dale, same brown hair, same weathered face, same ranger uniform, but his eyes were completely black, like holes in his head. And when he smiled, his jaw opened too wide, showing rows of teeth that were too sharp and too many. "You can stay here with your new friends," he said in Dale's voice. "We have room for one more." I ran. My carbide lamp bounced wildly as I stumbled back through the narrow passage, throwing crazy shadows on the cave walls. Behind me, I could hear the thing that looked like Dale following, its footsteps echoing in the darkness. "Josh!" it called out in his voice. "Don't run! We just want to help you!" But underneath Dale's familiar tone was something else. A clicking sound, like insects or bones rattling together. I reached the three-way split and took the passage on the right, hoping it would lead to another exit. I'd studied the cave maps, but down here in the dark, with fear clouding my mind, everything looked the same. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes opening into small chambers, sometimes getting so narrow I had to squeeze through sideways. My lamp started flickering. The carbide was running low. If it went out, I'd be lost in complete darkness with that thing hunting me. I could still hear it following, but the sounds were getting strange. Sometimes it sounded like Dale's heavy boots. Other times it was more like claws scraping on stone. And sometimes I heard that clicking sound, like bones being sorted through. "Josh, you're going the wrong way," it called out. "The exit is back here with me." I kept running. The passage started going upward, which gave me hope. Maybe it would lead out of the cave system. But then I heard something that made me stop cold. Dale's voice was coming from ahead of me now, not behind. "Josh, is that you? I've been looking everywhere. E4U." I pressed myself against the cave wall and held my breath. How could it be in front of me when I'd just heard it behind me? "I found the hunters," Dale's voice continued from somewhere ahead. "They're all safe. Come on out so we can get them to a doctor." I knew it wasn't really Dale. The real Dale was probably back at the ranger station wondering why I hadn't radioed in. But how was this thing making his voice? And how was it moving through the caves so fast? I waited in the darkness, trying to think. My grandmother's stories came back to me. Warnings about creatures that could steal your voice, your face, your whole self. Bone eaters, she called them. Things that lived in the deep places and fed on human suffering. The clicking sound was getting closer. I could hear it moving through the passage toward me, but there was something wrong with the footsteps, too many of them, like it had more than 2 feet. My lamp flickered again and went out. Complete darkness surrounded me like a living thing. I'd been in caves before when the lights failed, but this was different. This darkness felt thick and hungry, like it was trying to crawl into my lungs and choke me. I fumbled for my emergency flashlight, but my hands were shaking so bad I dropped it. It hit the stone floor with a sound like gunshot and rolled away. "There you are," Dale's voice whispered right next to my ear. I lunged forward, swinging my fist at where the voice came from. My knuckles hit the cave wall hard enough to split the skin, but I didn't hit anything else. Laughter echoed through the darkness. Not Dale's laugh. Something else. Something that had never been human. I crawled forward on my hands and knees, feeling around for my flashlight. My fingers found it just as something grabbed my ankle. The grip was like iron and cold as ice water. I kicked with my free leg and heard a sound like breaking sticks. Whatever had me let go and I scrambled forward, clicking on the flashlight. The beam showed the passage ahead, but when I looked back, there was nothing there, just empty darkness and the echo of that terrible laughter. I ran again, following the beam of my flashlight. The passage kept going up, and finally I saw something that gave me hope. A faint gray light ahead. Daylight. I reached the cave entrance, gasping and shaking. It was a different exit, maybe half a mile from where I'd gone in. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky orange and red. Rex was waiting for me, whining and pacing back and forth. He ran to me when I came out, jumping up and licking my face like he thought I was dead. "Good boy," I said, scratching behind his ears. "You were smarter than me." I needed to get back to the ranger station and call for help. A real rescue team with proper equipment and enough men to search the whole cave system. But as I started hiking back to my truck, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I could hear Dale's voice calling from inside the cave. "Josh, come back. I found something you need to see." But Dale couldn't be in there. I just talked to him on the radio that morning, and he was supposed to be working the north sector today, 20 miles from Turkey Run, unless something had gotten to him first. I ran through the woods toward my truck, Rex beside me. The sun was going down fast, and these mountains got dangerous after dark even without monsters hiding in the caves. But when I reached my truck, Dale was waiting for me. He was leaning against the hood, smoking a cigarette and looking perfectly normal. Same brown hair, same weathered face, same ranger uniform. But his eyes caught the last rays of sunlight and reflected them back like an animal's. "Find anything interesting down there, Josh?" he asked, taking a drag from his cigarette. I backed away from the truck, my hand reaching for the rifle I kept in the gun rack. But Dale, or the thing wearing Dale's face, moved faster than any human could, in on. A smooth motion. It grabbed my wrist and twisted. Pain shot up my arm and I dropped to my knees. Up close, I could see the details that were wrong. Its skin was too pale, too smooth. Its teeth were too sharp when it smiled. And when it breathed, I smelled something like rotting meat. "The Cherokee had a name for us," it said in Dale's voice. "Kanehai, the Bone Eaters. We've been sleeping in these caves for a very long time." "What did you do to Dale?" I managed to say through gritted teeth. "Nothing he didn't deserve," it answered. "He was so eager to help when I called for assistance. Such a dedicated ranger, coming into the dark all alone." The thing that looked like my partner let go of my wrist and stepped back. In the fading light, I could see its true shape starting to show through Dale's appearance. Taller than any human, with arms that were too long and fingers that ended in claws. "Your ancestors knew about us," it continued. "They left warnings carved in the sacred places, told stories to keep people away from our territory. But you forgot, didn't you? Stopped believing in the old ways." I thought about the bones I'd seen in the cave, arranged in neat piles like a collection. Some old, some fresh. "How long have you been here?" "Since before your kind walked these mountains. We sleep for decades at a time, feeding on what the earth provides. But every 20 years or so, we wake hungry." The pieces fell into place. The settlers who'd disappeared in the 1890s. The Cherokee warnings about places where the dead couldn't rest. Even the missing animals. This thing had been feeding for months, maybe years, getting stronger. Those men in the cave are exactly where they belong. We don't kill quickly, Joshua Whitefeather. We savor our meals. Break the bones slowly, let the marrow age like fine wine. They'll last us through the winter. Rex growled from behind. His hackles raised. The thing wearing Dale's face turned toward him and smiled that too-wide smile. "Your dog knows what I am. Animals always do. They can smell the death on us." I remembered my grandmother's stories, searching for anything that might help. The Bone Eaters were powerful, but they had weaknesses too. They couldn't stand direct sunlight. That's why they lived in caves. They were bound to their territory, unable to leave the deep places where they slept. And salt. Cherokee warriors used to carry blessed salt to protect themselves from evil spirits. The emergency kit in my truck had road salt for icy conditions. It wasn't blessed by Cherokee medicine men, but it was all I had. "You're going to join your friends in the cave," the creature said. "But first, I think I'll take your shape. It might be useful to have another ranger's face." It started toward me, its form growing larger and more twisted with each step. Dale's appearance was melting away like a mask made of wax, revealing the thing underneath. 8 feet tall, bone-white skin, stretched over a frame that was almost human but wrong in every detail. No eyes, just dark sockets that seemed to pull in light. A mouth that opened like a snake's, showing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Arms that reached almost to the ground, ending in claws designed for digging and tearing. I dove for my truck, grabbing the bag of road salt from the bed. The creature lunged after me, moving with horrible speed. Its claws raked across the truck's tailgate, leaving deep gouges in the metal. I ripped open the salt bag and threw a handful at the thing's face. Where the salt hit, its skin began to smoke and bubble. It let out a scream that sounded like breaking glass and stumbled backward. "Iron and salt," I said, remembering my grandmother's words. "The old protections still work." The creature was hurt, but not beaten. It circled around me, staying just out of range of the salt. In the growing darkness, I could barely see its white form moving between the trees. "You can't run forever," it hissed. "This is our territory. We know every cave, every hollow, every place you might hide." But I had one advantage it didn't expect. I knew these mountains too, and I'd been carrying something in my truck that might just save my life. 3 sticks of dynamite left over from a controlled avalanche we'd done last winter to clear a blocked road, enough explosive to bring down a good-sized cave entrance. The creature came at me again, and I threw more salt, driving it back. Then I ran for the cave entrance where I'd first gone in, the creature following close behind. "You're going back to your friends," it called after me. How perfect! I reached the cave mouth and lit the fuse on all 3 sticks of dynamite at once. The creature appeared at the entrance just as I threw the explosives as deep into the cave as I could. 10 seconds, I said, and started counting. The creature realized what I'd done. It turned to run, but the cave entrance was narrow and it was too large to move quickly through the opening. I made it to 6 before the world exploded. The blast brought down half the cliff face. Tons of limestone crashed into the cave entrance, sealing it forever. The creature's scream was cut off mid-note as thousands of pounds of rock buried the passage. I was thrown to the ground by the explosion, my ears ringing and dust filling my lungs. When the echoes died away, the silence that followed was different from the unnatural quiet I'd felt before. This was peaceful, like the mountains could finally breathe again. Rex found me lying in the rubble, dazed but alive. He licked my face and whined, checking to make sure I was okay. Good dog. He'd known something was wrong from the start. It took 18 hours for the rescue team to find me. I'd radioed for help as soon as I could reach my truck, but the story I told was simpler than the truth. Cave-in during rescue attempt. 6 hunters low. St. Partner missing, presumed dead. They found Dale's body 3 days later, 5 miles from Turkey Run, in a shallow grave. The medical examiner said he'd been dead for at least a week. Whatever that thing was, it had been wearing his face a lot longer than just that one day. The official report blamed unstable geology and dangerous rescue conditions. Turkey Run Cave was declared permanently closed, the entrance sealed with concrete barriers. No one questioned my decision to use explosives. Sometimes that's the only way to save lives in a cave rescue gone wrong. But the Cherokee Tribal Council knew better. Old Samuel Stonecrow came to see me at the hospital while I was recovering from my injuries. He brought sage and blessed salt, ancient protections that his people had maintained for generations. "The bone eater is trapped, not dead," he told me quietly. "Rock and earth hold it for now, but these things are patient. They can wait decades for freedom." Will it get out? Not if we maintain the vigil. My people will watch that place as we have watched other sleeping places. But you must promise me something, Joshua Whitefeather. I promised. Never go back to Turkey Run Hollow. And if anyone else goes missing in Cherokee territory, you come to us first. Some things are too old and too hungry for modern law enforcement. I kept that promise. Transferred to a different forest the next month, told everyone I needed a change after losing my partner. Couldn't handle the caves anymore, they said. Post-traumatic stress from the accident. They weren't wrong exactly. But 37 years later, I still wake up sometimes hearing that voice calling my name from deep underground. Still dream about bone-white shapes moving through darkness, patient and hungry and waiting. The Cherokee still maintain their vigil at Turkey Run. Samuel's grandson sends me a letter every year to let me know the seals are holding. But he also tells me about other places, other caves where people have gone missing. The Bone Eaters had more than one lair in these ancient mountains. So I'm telling you this story as a warning. If you're ever hiking in Cherokee territory and you find a cave that's too quiet, where no animals make their homes, and the very air feels heavy with old malice, turn around and walk away. Don't be curious. Don't be brave. Don't think your modern equipment and scientific knowledge will protect you from things that were old when the Cherokee first walked these hills. Some places are hollow for a reason, and some hungers never die. They just sleep, waiting in the dark for the next fool who doesn't believe in old stories. The mountain people still remember. They know which hollows to avoid, which caves to seal with iron and blessed salt. They teach their children the old warnings, even if the children think it's just superstition. Maybe especially then, because the Bone Eaters are still down there, in the deep places where the earth keeps its oldest secrets, still arranging their collections, still humming their bone-deep songs, still waiting for someone to forget the old stories and come looking for adventure in the dark. Don't be that someone. Trust me on this one. My name is Rebecca Moonwhisper, and I've been a park ranger in George Washington National Forest for 9 years now. I know that sounds like a made-up name, but it's real. My mom was Native American and my dad was Jewish. They thought it sounded pretty together. I specialize in family camping programs. In 9 years, I've helped over 150 families have safe, fun camping trips in these Virginia mountains. I know every trail, every camping spot, and every danger these woods can throw at you. Bears, snakes, getting lost, bad weather. I've seen it all and handled it all. What I didn't believe in were ghost stories. The old-timers around here love to talk about Shadow Mountain. They say a whole settlement disappeared back in 1847. Just vanished one day, they claim. Left behind stone foundations and a little cemetery, but no people. The story goes that all the children died first, then the adults just left. Or died too. Nobody really knows. Ghost children still play up there, Bill Hawkins told me once. Bill's been a ranger here for 23 years, and he's normally the most sensible guy you'd ever meet. You can hear them laughing sometimes, see their toys. I always rolled my eyes at stories like that. Ghost children? Come on. Dead kids don't come back to play games. I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. It was Memorial Day weekend, 1971. Perfect weather. Sunny, 75 degrees, not a cloud in the sky. The kind of weekend that brings families out of the cities to experience nature. I was doing my usual rounds, checking on the campers, making sure everyone was safe and following the rules. That's when I met the Henderson family. They'd set up camp about 8 miles from the main campground, way up near the old settlement ruins on Shadow Mountain. It was a legal camping spot, but not many people went up there. Too isolated. The old logging road was rough and wise. I had to hike the last mile. Tom and Sarah Henderson seemed like good parents. Their 3 kids, Tommy, 8 years old, Lisa, 6, and little Mike, who was only 4, were polite and excited about their first real camping trip. The kids love it up here, Sarah told me as I checked their permits. They've been playing all morning. Playing with who? I asked, looking around. I didn't see any other families nearby. Oh, they've made friends with some other children, Tom said, smiling. Kids are amazing that way, aren't they? They find playmates anywhere. I looked around again. Their campsite was completely alone. The nearest other family was 3 miles down the mountain. What other children? Sarah laughed. The ones from the settlement, I guess. There must be other families camping up in those ruins. The kids keep talking about Mary and Samuel and Elizabeth. They're teaching our kids some old-fashioned games. A cold feeling started in my stomach. I'd checked the permits for this entire area that morning. The Hendersons were the only family approved to camp on Shadow Mountain this weekend. "Mrs. Henderson," I said carefully, "there are no other families up here. You're the only ones." She gave me a confused look. "But the children—" "Tommy," I called out. "Lisa, Mike, come here for a minute." The 3 kids came running from behind some old stone walls, the foundations of the original settlement. They looked happy and excited, but also different somehow. Their cheeks were pale, and their eyes seemed glassy. "Did you make some new friends?" I asked Tommy. He nodded eagerly. "Mary showed us how to play Ring Around the Rosie the old way, and Samuel taught us a game with cornhusk dolls. Elizabeth knows all the best hiding spots." "Where are these children now?" Tommy pointed behind the stone walls. "Right there. Don't you see them?" I looked. I saw nothing but empty space and old ruins. Lisa tugged on my sleeve. "Mary says you can't see them because you're a grown-up. Only children can see them clearly." That cold feeling in my stomach got worse. "What do they look like, honey?" "They wear funny old clothes," Mike piped up in his little voice. "Like from the olden days. Their clothes are all white and pretty." I spent the next hour with the Henderson family, and everything seemed normal on the surface. The kids played, the parents made lunch, everyone was happy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The temperature around the old cemetery was at least 20 degrees colder than the rest of the campsite. My radio kept crackling with static whenever I got near the stone foundations. And the kids, they kept looking at empty spaces and giggling, like they were seeing something I couldn't. When I left that afternoon, I was already planning to come back the next day. Not because I believed in ghosts, I still didn't, but because something was definitely wrong on Shadow Mountain, and it was my job to keep families safe. I just didn't know yet how dangerous those imaginary friends really were. I drove back up to Shadow Mountain the next morning with a knot in my stomach. I'd barely slept thinking about those Henderson kids and their invisible friends. The first thing I noticed was the toys. Scattered around the Henderson campsite were things that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. Wooden hoops, cornhusk dolls with faded dresses, a child's wooden top, old-fashioned toys. Really old-fashioned. "Good morning, Ranger Rebecca," Tommy called out, running up to me with a big smile. But his smile looked wrong somehow, too wide, too empty. "Where did these toys come from?" I asked Tom Henderson, pointing at the wooden hoop. He shrugged. "The kids must have found them around the ruins. Amazing they're in such good condition, isn't it? Must be replicas left by some historical society." I picked up the wooden hoop. It was worn smooth by many small hands, and it felt old, really old, not like a replica at all. "Tommy," I said, kneeling down to his level, "tell me more about your new friends." His eyes got that glassy look again. "Mary's the oldest. She's 10, like I almost am. She died of the fever, but she doesn't remember being sick. Samuel is 8, and he's really good at marbles. Elizabeth is the littlest. She's only 5. "When did they die, Tommy?" "A long, long time ago. Before cars. Before anything. They've been waiting here for someone to play with." The cold feeling in my stomach turned to ice. That afternoon, while the parents were napping, I watched the kids play. They were in the middle of the ruins, holding hands in a circle, singing, "Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes. We all fall down." But they weren't alone in their circle. I could see them now, faint, like looking through water, but definitely there. 3 children in old-fashioned white clothes, a girl who looked about 10 with long dark hair, a boy about 8 with suspenders, a tiny girl with pigtails. They were playing Ring Around the Rosie with the Henderson children, and every time they fell down, Tommy, Lisa, and Mike looked a little paler. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, the ghost children were gone, but the Henderson kids were still in their circle, still singing, still falling down. "Kids," I called, "come have some water." They ignored me completely. They couldn't hear me. It was like they were in their own world. I had to physically grab Tommy's shoulder to get his attention. When I touched him, he was ice cold. "We're playing," he said in a dreamy voice. "Mary says we can play forever if we want." That night, I radioed Bill Hawkins. He drove up after dark, bringing coffee and his 40 years of mountain experience. "You see them too now," he said quietly, watching me pace around the campfire. "I don't know what I saw," said. "Maybe the altitude, maybe I'm just tired." "Rebecca." His voice was serious. "I've been waiting 9 years for someone else to see them. Those children died in the winter of 1847, typhoid fever. Killed 23 kids in 6 weeks. That's impossible. Their parents were so grief-stricken, they just left, abandoned the settlement, left the children buried in that little cemetery." Bill pointed toward the old graveyard. "No one ever came back to tend the graves. No one ever said proper goodbyes." "Bill, you can't seriously believe—" Tommy Henderson's scream cut through the night. We ran to their tent and found him sitting up, eyes wide with terror. He was shaking and burning with fever. "The cold children," he whispered. "They want me to stay with them forever. They want all of us to stay." Sarah Henderson was crying. "He's been getting sicker all day. Lisa and Mike, too. We were going to drive them to the hospital in the morning." I checked the other 2 kids. Same symptoms, high fever, pale skin, and they wouldn't stop talking about their new friends. "Mary says the hospital can't help," Lisa whispered. "She says once you start playing with them, you can't leave. You have to stay and play forever." Bill and I exchanged looks. In his eyes, I saw the truth I didn't want to accept. "We need to get these children off this mountain," I said. "Now." But when we tried to pack up the Henderson family, the kids wouldn't move. They sat in the dirt by the old cemetery and refused to get in the car. "We can't leave our friends," Mike said. His 4-year-old voice sounded old and hollow. "Mary says if we leave, we'll never see them again, and then they'll be lonely forever." Tom Henderson tried to pick up Mike, but the little boy screamed so loudly that birds flew out of the trees. When Tom touched him, frost actually formed on Tom's hands. That's when I knew we weren't dealing with imagination or fever dreams. We were dealing with something much worse. By midnight, none of the Henderson children would eat, drink, or sleep. They just sat by the old semiums, eddery, staring at empty air and whispering to people we couldn't see. "They're getting weaker," Sarah Henderson sobbed. "Look at them." She was right. In just 2 days, the kids had lost weight. Their eyes had dark circles under them. Their skin was so pale it was almost transparent. And they were starting to talk like old-fashioned children. "Prithee, mother, might we stay and play a while longer?" Lisa asked in a voice that didn't sound like hers at all. "We shall be ever so good," little Mike added, using words a 4-year-old shouldn't even know. Tom Henderson looked at me with desperate eyes. "What's happening to our children?" I didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound crazy. Bill did, though. "They're being recruited," he said quietly. "The ghost children have been alone for over 100 years. Now they've found living children to play with, and they don't want to let them go." "That's impossible," Tom said. "Is it?" Bill pointed to the cemetery. "Look." I looked, and this time I saw all of them clearly. 23 children in old-fashioned white clothes standing around the Henderson kids. Some were teenagers, some were toddlers. All of them were pale and transparent, and all of them were holding hands with Tommy, Lisa, and Mike. They were draining the life right out of them. "We have to do something," I said. "But what do you do against dead children who just want friends?" I tried approaching them directly. "Mary?" I called out. "Mary, can you hear me?" The oldest ghost girl turned to look at me. Her eyes were sad and empty. "You can see us now," she said in a voice like wind through leaves. "We've been waiting so long for someone to see us. Mary, you're hurting these children. You have to let them go." "But they're our friends," she said, confused. "We've been so lonely, we just want to play." "You're making them sick." Mary looked down at Tommy, who was, as now so pale his lips were blue. "Are we?" she asked, sounding genuinely surprised. "We don't mean to. We get so cold without friends. When we touch living children, we feel warm again. That's when I understood. The ghost children weren't evil. They were just lonely, scared kids who didn't understand they were dead. Every time they tried to play with living children, they accidentally drained their warmth, their life. "Mary," I said gently, "do you remember being sick?" She shook her head. "We were playing and then everyone left. Mother and father and all the grown-ups. They left us here alone. Honey, you died. All of you. From the fever. Your parents didn't leave you. They died too, and went to heaven." The ghost children looked confused. "But we're still here," said Samuel, the 8-year-old boy. "Your bodies died, but your spirits got stuck. You've been waiting here for over 100 years. Mary started to cry, tears that looked like morning mist. 100 years? But we've only been playing for... She looked around at her ghost friends, then at the Henderson children, who were now so weak they could barely sit up. "Are we hurting them?" she asked in a small voice. "Yes," I said. "Every minute they stay with you, they get weaker. If they don't leave soon, they'll die too." Mary's face crumpled. "We don't want to hurt anyone. We just wanted friends." But Samuel, the ghost boy, looked angry. "No," he said. "We've been alone too long. If they die, they can stay with us forever. We'll never be lonely again." The other ghost children started nodding. I could see them pressing closer to the Henderson kids, and Tommy's eyes started to flutter closed. "You have a choice," I told them. "You can kill these children and trap their spirits here with you, or you can let them go and move on to where your families are waiting for you." "Our families?" Elizabeth, the littlest ghost, perked up. "Mother and father? They're in heaven waiting for you, but you can't get there while you're holding on to this place." Mary looked torn. "But if we leave, we'll be alone again." "No," I said. "You'll be with everyone who loves you, your parents, your grandparents, everyone who's been waiting for you to come home." The ghost children looked at each other, then at the dying Henderson children. Mary made her choice. "Let them go," she told the others. "We've been selfish." "No!" Samuel shouted. "We want friends." And that's when the real fight began. Samuel's ghost form suddenly became solid, more real than any of the others. His eyes turned black, and when he opened his mouth, frost came out instead of breath. "They stay with us," he screamed. "Forever!" The other ghost children split into two groups. About half followed Mary, backing away from the Henderson kids, but the other half, led by Samuel, pressed closer. Tommy Henderson collapsed, just fell over like a rag doll. "Tommy!" Sarah Henderson screamed, running to her son. But when she tried to touch him, her hands passed right through him. He was becoming a ghost. "Bill!" I yelled. "The truck! Get it started!" Bill ran for the ranger truck while I faced down 11 angry ghost children. "You can't have them," I told Samuel. "We've waited too long," he said. His voice was like ice cracking. "We deserve friends." That's when I remembered something from my childhood, something my grandmother taught me. She'd always worn a small silver cross, even though our family wasn't particularly religious. "Evil spirits can't stand the touch of silver blessed with love," she used to say. I pulled my own silver cross from under my shirt, the one she'd given me before she died. When I held it up, Samuel hissed and backed away. "You're not evil," I told him. "You're just scared and lonely. But you can't solve that by hurting other children." "Give them to us," he demanded. "I can't do that." I stepped between Samuel and the Henderson children. "But I can help you find your family." Mary, the oldest ghost girl, floated closer to me. "How?" she whispered. "Close your eyes," I told her. "Think about your mother. Think about how much she loved you. Think about how much she missed you when you got sick." Mary closed her eyes, and her ghost form started to glow with a soft, warm light. I can feel her," Mary said, wonder in her voice. "She's calling my name." One by one, the other peaceful ghost children started to glow too. But Samuel and his group weren't giving up. They rushed toward Tommy, Lisa, and Mike. I held my cross out like a shield. The angry ghosts bounced off an invisible barrier, but I could feel the cold draining my strength. "Bill!" I shouted. "Now!" Bill came running with 3 thick wool blankets from the truck. We wrapped the Henderson children up and carried them toward the vehicle, but Samuel's group surrounded us. The temperature dropped so fast that ice formed on the truck windows. "You can't take them!" Samuel screamed. "They're ours now!" That's when Mary spoke up. "Samuel," she said firmly, "that's enough." The oldest ghost girl was glowing brighter now, and her voice carried the authority of someone who'd been taking care of younger children for over a century. "Look at them," she told Samuel, pointing at the Henderson kids. "Really look." Samuel looked, and I saw his expression change. Tommy was barely breathing. Lisa's lips were purple. Mike wasn't moving at all. "Do you want to be responsible for killing them?" Mary asked gently. Samuel's anger cracked. "But we'll be alone," he whispered. "No, we won't," Mary said. She took his ghostly hand. "Our families are waiting. Can't you feel them?" Slowly, Samuel nodded. His black eyes turned back to normal brown. "I can feel Mother," he said in amazement. One by one, all the ghost children started to fade, their forms becoming lighter and brighter. "Thank you," Mary said to me, "for helping us remember." "Will you be okay?" I asked. She smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from any of the ghost children. "We're going home." The light got brighter and brighter until I had to close my eyes. When I opened them, the ghost children were gone, and the Henderson kids were breathing normally. The Henderson family left Shadow Mountain that morning. Tommy, Lisa, and Mike had no memory of the ghost children at all. To them, they'd just had a fun camping trip where they played some old-fashioned games. Their parents remembered everything, though. "Will anyone believe us?" Tom Henderson asked as they packed up their camp. "Does it matter?" I replied. "Your kids are safe. That's what counts." Sarah hugged me tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what you did, but thank you." After they drove away, Bill and I walked through the old settlement one more time. The temperature was normal now. My radio worked fine, and the old toys, the wooden hoops and corn-husk dolls, had crumbled to dust. "Think they made it?" Bill asked. "The ghost kids, I mean." I looked at the little cemetery, where 23 small headstones stood in neat rows. For the first time in over a century, fresh wildflowers were growing on each grave. "Yeah," I said. "I think they made it home." We closed Shadow Mountain to camping for the rest of the summer. The official report blamed unstable geological conditions, which wasn't technically a lie. Death and unfinished business are pretty unstable conditions. I still work as a park ranger. I still specialize in family camping programs. But I've learned something important. Not all dangers in the wilderness come from bears or bad weather. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the woods is loneliness. I've helped over 200 families have safe camping trips since that Memorial Day weekend. And whenever I meet parents who want to camp in isolated areas, I always tell them the same thing. Make sure your children are never alone long enough to make friends with shadows. Most people don't you think I'm being poetic. A few understand what I really mean. And every year on Memorial Day, I drive up to Shadow Mountain and leave fresh flowers on 23 small graves. Not because I think the children are still there. I know they're not. But because someone should remember that they lived and played and just wanted friends. Even dead children deserve to be remembered with love. The woods are full of lonely spirits, but most of them, if you show them kindness instead of fear, just want help finding their way home. I learned that from 23 children who taught me that love is stronger than loneliness, and that sometimes the best way to help the dead is to remind them that they're not forgotten. The Henderson children grew up healthy and happy. Tommy's 32 now, with kids of his own. Sometimes he sends me pictures of his family camping trips. He always camps in well-populated campgrounds. Smart man. My name is Daniel Ironwolf, and I've spent 14 years tracking predators through the Appalachian wilderness. Most folks think that's a dangerous job. But the truth is, wild animals are predictable. They follow patterns. They have territories. They hunt for food, not sport. At least, that's what I believed until October 1989. I worked the Dolly Sods Wilderness in West Virginia, 10,000 acres of high plateau country that most people never see. It's not your typical Appalachian forest. Up here, the trees thin out into open meadows dotted with massive boulders and thick patches of mountain laurel. When the wind picks up, it howls across those rocks like something alive. My grandfather used to tell stories about this place. He was Cherokee, and he said the old people knew to stay away during certain times. Bad moon country, he'd call it. I always figured that was just old superstition mixed with the German settlers' werewolf tales. Europeans brought a lot of strange stories to these mountains. As a wildlife biologist, I knew better. I'd studied wolf behavior, bear patterns, cougar hunting methods. I could tell you exactly what killed a deer by looking at the bite marks. Could track a black bear for miles by reading scat and scratches. In 14 years, I'd seen escaped dogs, hybrid wolf dogs, even a few exotic cats that people kept illegally. Nothing I couldn't explain. That October started normal enough. Hunting season was coming, and I was doing my usual predator surveys. The deer population was healthy, maybe too healthy. Black bears were already denning up for winter after a good berry year. Everything was exactly as it should be. Except for the livestock attacks down in the valley. 3 farms had lost animals in 2 weeks. Not unusual, except for the pattern. Whatever was doing the killing wasn't eating much meat. It was just killing, ripping throats out, and moving on. That's not normal predator behavior. Wolves kill to eat. Bears kill to protect territory. This thing was different. The bite marks were wrong too. Too big for any dog, too precise for a bear. The spacing suggested something with a jaw bigger than any predator we had in West Virginia. And the tracks, when I could find clear ones, showed something that walked on 4 legs but had a stride too long for its foot size. I set up trail cameras around the attack sites, standard procedure. Whatever was out there would eventually pass in front of one, and I'd have my answer. Probably just a large hybrid dog or maybe someone's escaped exotic animal. Had to be. But as I worked those hills in the days leading up to the full moon, I started noticing other things. Small things. The regular animals were acting strange. Deer weren't using their normal trails. Birds went quiet earlier each evening. Even the insects seemed off. Too many in some places, none at all in others. And the smell. There was this smell in certain spots, like wet dog but sharper, muskier. It made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't explain. I'm not a superstitious man. I believe in what I can measure and track and photograph. But something about those October evenings, as the moon grew fuller, made me think about my grandfather's stories. Made me wish I'd listened more carefully when he tried to teach me the old ways. The night before the full moon, I was checking my cameras when I found the first one. The metal case was dented like something had grabbed it with massive claws. The housing was cracked, and when I looked at the memory card, all I got were blurry images that looked like light streaks and shadows. But in one frame, just for a split second, I saw something standing upright between 2 trees. Something that was too tall to be a bear and the wrong shape to be human. I told myself it was just a mere malfunction. Equipment fails. Happens all the time. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to examine too closely, I knew I was lying to myself. The call came in at 6 a.m. on the morning of the full moon. Heinrich Muller's prize bull was dead, and it wasn't pretty. I drove out to the Muller farm with my camera and measuring kit, expecting another livestock attack. What I found changed everything I thought I knew about predators. The bull weighed nearly 2,000 pounds. It had been flipped onto its back like a toy. The throat was torn out, but the wound was too clean, too precise. And the blood. There was too much blood for the wounds I could see, like the thing had bled the animal deliberately. But the tracks around the body told the real story. They started human. Size 11 boots, probably work boots based on the tread pattern. I followed them from the farmhouse toward the pasture, clear as day in the soft mud. Halfway there, they changed. I stared at that trail for 10 minutes, checking my measurements twice. The human prints ended mid-stride, and wolf prints began. Not beside them, not overlapping. The same trail, the same gait, just different feet. Find anything useful? I spun around. Tom Braswell, the state wildlife officer, was walking up behind me. Tom was good people. We'd worked together on poaching cases for years. If anyone would help me make sense of this, it was him. Tom, come look at this track pattern. Tell me what you see. He crouched down next to me, studying the prints. Tom had 20 years of tracking experience. His face went pale as he followed the trail. That's not possible, he said finally. What do you think happened? I think someone's playing games with us. Had to set this up somehow. But his voice didn't sound convinced. We spent the morning documenting everything, taking photos, collecting samples, professional work, by the book. But neither of us talked about those tracks. Not really. Around noon, Heinrich Muller came out to check on us. He was a big man, third-generation German-American, Hans Lee, Geheimhawks from 40 years of farm work. But when he looked at that dead bull, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. My grandfather used to tell stories, Heinrich said quietly, about the old country, about things that came over with the settlers. He shook his head, thought it was just old man talk. What kind of stories? Tom asked. Heinrich looked up at the mountains surrounding his farm. About families with curses. About the full moon bringing out things that shouldn't exist. That evening, I made camp up on the plateau. If something was hunting in the valley, it was coming from somewhere up here. I'd find its den, its territory markers, something that would explain what we were dealing with. The sun set blood red behind the western ridges. As darkness settled over Dolly sods, I heard the first howl. It wasn't like any wolf call I knew. Too deep, too long, with something almost human in the sound. It echoed off the rock formations for what seemed like minutes. Then it was answered, from 3 different directions. I checked my rifle and settled into my sleeping bag, but I didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. Every sound in the forest seemed wrong. Branches breaking without wind. Rustling in the brush that was too heavy for deer, too purposeful for random animals. Around midnight, something walked past my camp. I lay perfectly still in my bag, listening to footsteps circle my tent. Heavy steps, deliberate. Whatever it was stopped right outside my head and sniffed. Long, deep breaths like it was tasting my scent. The footsteps moved away, but I could feel eyes watching me from the darkness. Waiting. When morning came, I found the tracks. 4-legged, approaching my camp. 2-legged circling it. 4-legged leaving. The same animal, the same stride. Just different. I broke camp fast and headed back to town. Had to think this through. Had to figure, re-out what I was really dealing with. But as I packed my gear, I found something that made my blood turn to ice water. Snagged on a thorn bush next to my camp was a piece of cloth. Blue, denim, fresh torn. Still had the smell of fabric softener. Someone had been watching me. Someone who could walk on 4 legs when they wanted to. I thought about Heinrich's stories, about my grandfather's warnings, about all the rational explanations I was running out of. And for the first time in my professional career, I started to wonder if there were some predators that science couldn't explain. I should have called for backup, should have brought in state police, maybe even federal wildlife agents. Instead, I went back to the plateau the next night. Tom came with me. "Whatever's up there," he said, "it's killed again." 2 hikers from Maryland had gone missing. Their car was still at the trailhead, but they never made it to their planned campsite. We found their gear scattered across a half-mile stretch of trail, sleeping bags shredded, food scattered, and blood. So much blood, but no bodies. "Bears don't do this," Tom said, examining a backpack that looked like it had been torn apart by industrial machinery. "Bears would eat something. This is just destruction." We followed the blood trail as far as we could. It led deeper into the wilderness, toward the rocky outcrops where the wind never stops howling. As the sun started setting, we made a decision that probably saved our lives. We climbed. There's a formation called Devil's Backbone that runs along the highest ridge of Dolly Sods. It's all exposed rock and stunted trees. Nowhere to hide, but excellent visibility. If something was hunting us, we'd see it coming. We'd also trapped ourselves with nowhere to run. The moon came up full and bright, turning the rocks silver and casting hard shadows between the boulders. That's when we heard them. Not one howl this time, but a whole pack, calling back and forth across the plateau like they were coordinating. "Wolves don't hunt in packs this size," Tom whispered. "None, but in West Virginia." But these weren't wolves. The first one appeared around 10 o'clock, slipping between two house-sized boulders about 50 yards away. It moved wrong, too upright, too purposeful. When it stopped and looked directly at us, I saw intelligence in those yellow eyes that was definitely not animal. It was 7 feet tall on its hind legs, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb moonlight. The head was wolf-like but too large, with human expressions playing across its features. When it opened its mouth, I saw teeth designed for tearing meat from living bone. "Jesus Christ," Tom breathed. His hand was shaking as he reached for his pistol. The creature tilted its head like it was listening. Then it smiled. Actually smiled, lips pulling back from those massive canines in an expression that was horribly, impossibly human. 2 more appeared on our flanks, smaller but just as wrong. They moved like people who'd forgotten how to be people, dropping to 4 legs when they needed speed, rising to 2 when they wanted to see better. "What are they?" Tom asked. Before I could answer, the largest one threw back its head and howled. The sound hit us like a physical force, echoing off the rocks until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. That's when Tom broke. He fired 3 shots wild, the muzzle flashes lighting up the rocks like camera bulbs. The creatures scattered, moving faster than anything that size should move, bounding from rock to rock like they weighed nothing. "Run!" Tom shouted. But there was nowhere to go. The attack came from behind. I heard Tom scream, then a horrible wet sound, then silence. When I spun around, one of the smaller creatures was standing over his body, its muzzle dark with blood. I raised my rifle, but the thing just looked at me with Tom's blood dripping from its jaws and shook its head slowly, like it was telling me not yet. Then they were gone. All of them. Vanished into the rocks like they'd never been there. Except for Tom's body. I stayed with him until dawn, my rifle trained on every shadow, every movement, in the periphery of my vision. His throat had been torn out with surgical precision. No random mauling, no feeding frenzy, just execution. And in the soft earth next to his body, I found something that made my hands shake. Boot prints. Size 11 work boots. The same tread pattern I'd been tracking all week. Someone had walked away from Tom's body on human feet. I spent the next day in the county library digging through old records and newspaper archives. What I found made me understand why my grandfather had warned me about bad moon country. The Germans who settled this area in the 1800s hadn't just brought farming techniques and old-world crafts. They'd brought their curses, too. The Mueller family was mentioned in records going back to 1847. Reports of livestock deaths during full moons. Stories of family members who went missing during certain times of the month. Accounts of wolf attacks by animals that were too smart, too organized. And always the attacks stopped when male members of the Mueller line died or moved away. Heinrich Mueller was the last of his bloodline in West Virginia. I drove back to his farm as the sun was setting on the second night of the full moon. Found him loading a shotgun on his front porch. "I know what you found up there," he said without looking at me. "Tom's family called, said he was dead. Heinrich, we need to talk." He finally looked at me then, and I saw resignation in his eyes. "My son came home this morning, naked, covered in blood. Doesn't remember where he's been." His voice broke. "Doesn't remember what he's done." "Where is he now?" "Locked in the root cellar. It's the only place with iron bars strong enough." Heinrich chambered around. "But when the moon comes up full tonight, Those bars won't hold him. There has to be another way. You think I haven't tried? You think 3 generations of my family have grease and tried? Heinrich's hands were shaking. The curse came with my great-grandfather from the Black Forest. Every full moon, the men in our line become something else. Something hungry. As if summoned by his words, a howl rose from the direction of the farmhouse cellar. Not human, not wolf. Something trapped between both. He's already changing, Heinrich whispered. The howl was answered from the mountains. The pack was coming down. How many? I asked. My son, my nephew from Pennsylvania, my cousin's boy from Maryland. They come when the moon calls them, hunt together. Heinrich looked at me with desperate eyes. They're not evil men during the day. They're good people. But when the moon rises, a sound like metal bending came from the cellar. The bars, Heinrich said. I thought about my grandfather's stories, about the silver-tipped arrows he'd made me learn to craft as a boy. Cherokee tradition said silver blessed by moonlight could cut the connection between a man and the evil spirits that possessed him. I might know a way, I said, but we need to get to higher ground. The cellar door exploded outward just as we reached my truck. The thing that emerged wasn't Heinrich's son anymore. It was 7 feet of muscle and fur and teeth, moving like liquid shadow across the farmyard. It spotted us and howled, a sound that seemed to tear the air itself. We drove for the mountains with 3 werewolves following us through the forest, keeping pace with the truck like it was standing still. Back on Devil's Backbone, I pulled out the arrows my grandfather had made me promise to keep. 3 of them, carved from mountain ash and tipped with silver, melted down from his wedding ring. Blessed under 13 full moons and wrapped in red cloth. Old Cherokee magic to fight old German curses, I whispered, stringing my bow. The pack surrounded us as the moon reached its peak. Heinrich's son in the center, flanked by 2 others I didn't recognize. They moved like they shared one mind, circling slowly, yellow eyes reflecting moonlight. Dad? The largest one spoke, its voice a horrible mix of human and animal. Why did you bring him here? Heinrich raised his shotgun with tears streaming down his face. To end this. To stop what we've become. The attack came from all sides at once. I put the first arrow through the heart of Heinrich's nephew. The silver point burned like a star, and the creature's howl cut off in mid-cry. It collapsed, and for just a moment, I saw the face of a young man who looked terrified and confused. The second arrow caught Heinrich's son in the shoulder, spinning him around, but not dropping him. The wound smoked where the silver touched, and the thing that had been his boy screamed in rage and pain. Heinrich's shotgun boomed twice. His son staggered but kept coming, silver buckshot burning holes in its hide. The third werewolf hit me from behind, claws raking across my back, dropping me to the rocks. I rolled, came up with my knife, and drove the silver blade deep into its chest. The creature's eyes went wide. For a moment, they were completely human. Thank you, it whispered, and died. Heinrich's son was the last one standing. Half his shoulder was gone where my arrow had hit, silver poisoning spreading through his system like liquid fire. But he was still huge, still deadly, still filled with supernatural rage. He looked at his father with eyes that held just enough humanity to understand what was happening. Dad, he said in his normal voice, I'm sorry. Heinrich pulled the trigger one last time. We buried them at dawn. Not in any cemetery. This kind of thing doesn't get recorded in official records. We found a quiet place up on the plateau where the wind would sing over their graves and the mountain laurel would bloom each spring. Heinrich left West Virginia a week later, sold the farm to developers and moved to Florida where his sister lived. Curse is broken now, he told me. No more Muel, or men too carry it forward. I went back to my regular duties, filing reports about the hikers who'd been killed by bears, about Tom Braswell who'd died in a fall while tracking predators. Official explanations for things that couldn't be officially explained, but I kept researching, kept digging through old immigration records and family histories. found evidence of at least 6 other European families who'd brought similar curses to the Appalachian Mountains. Most of the bloodlines had died out or moved away, but not all of them. The night after Heinrich left town, I was up on the plateau checking the area one last time, making sure it was really over. As I packed up my gear, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Howling from the deep forest. Not the same voices I'd heard before, but howling nonetheless. I thought about all those family histories I'd been reading, all those old stories from different parts of the mountains, and I realized that Heinrich Müller's curse might be broken, but there were other curses out there, other families, other secrets hiding in the hollows and ridges of Appalachian country. These mountains are old, older than the Cherokee, older than the German settlers, older than any human presence. But the things that live here now aren't ancient. They're imports. European nightmares that followed desperate people across an ocean looking for new hunting grounds. I still work these mountains, still track predators. But now I carry silver arrows along with my regular gear, and I pay attention to the old stories my grandfather tried to teach me. Because some predators can't be explained by science, and some hunts never really end. The moon is full again next week. I'll be ready. But sometimes, in the dark hours before dawn, I wonder if being ready is enough. I wonder how many other families are out there, carrying curses they don't understand, and becoming things they never chose to be. And I wonder what happens when I get too old to climb these mountains, when there's no one left who knows how to fight the things that shouldn't exist. The howling never really stops in Dolly Sods. You just learn to listen for the difference between wolves and something worse. My name is Daniel Ironwolf. I've spent 14 years tracking predators in the Appalachian wilderness. Now I know that sometimes the predators are tracking me back. My name is Amanda Riversong, and I've been a ranger in these West Virginia mountains for 11 years. 11 years of pulling lost hikers out of snowdrifts, teaching city folks how to survive when nature turns mean, and walking through forests so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat. 47 successful winter rescues. That's what my record says. But numbers don't tell you everything. I grew up hearing my grandmother's stories about the old spirits that lived in these mountains. The Seneca knew these forests long before white folks came with their axes and saws. Grandma Rose would sit by the fire and tell me about the Wendigo, the hungry ghost that came when winter got too cold and people got too desperate. Just stories, I always told myself. Just old tales to keep children from wandering off. That was before February of 1977, before the worst blizzard in 20 years hit the cranberry wilderness, and I learned that some stories are more real than you want them to be. It started with a radio call at 4:30 in the morning. Static crackled through my cabin radio, and dispatch's voice cut through the white noise. Riversong, we got a family overdue. 4 people, mom, dad, 2 kids, supposed to check in yesterday evening. Last known location was the old logging area near Cranberry River. I knew that area. 35,000 acres of nothing but trees, rocks, and isolation. In good weather, it's beautiful. In a blizzard with temperatures hitting -15 and 4 feet of snow on the ground, it's a death trap. I grabbed my gear, winter survival pack, emergency shelter, first aid kit, enough food for 3 days. The snow was coming down so hard I could barely see my truck. My radio crackled again. Be advised, the radio tower's down. You'll be on your own out there. Great. No backup, no communication, and a storm that showed no signs of stopping. The drive took 2 hours instead of the usual 40 minutes. I had to stop 3 times to dig my truck out of drifts. When I finally reached the trailhead, the world was white silence. No bird calls, no wind through the trees. Even my boots crunching through the snow sounded wrong. Too loud, like the forest was holding its breath. The old logging camp sat about 3 miles back in the woods. During the 1800s, a crew worked that area during the winter months, cutting trees and hauling them out when the snow melted. Local stories said bad things happened there, men going missing, strange tracks in the snow, sounds that didn't belong to any animal people knew. I'd always figured those were just tall tales. Logging was dangerous work, and winter made everything worse. Men died from accidents, hypothermia, getting lost. People needed explanations for tragedy, so they made up monsters. But as I strapped on my snowshoes and started into those trees, something felt different. The silence was too complete. In 11 years of winter rescues, I'd never seen a forest so empty of life. No squirrel tracks, no bird signs, nothing. Even the trees looked wrong, branches heavy with snow, but bent in ways that didn't make sense. My compass spun lazily, unable to find north. Equipment problems. The cold could mess with electronics. That's what I told myself. 3 miles in, I found the cabin. The Morrison family's car sat buried under 3 feet of snow, just the outline visible. Good news. They'd made it this far. Bad news. The cabin looked dark, no smoke from the chimney, and I could see broken glass scattered across the snow near the front door. "Hello," I called out. "Forest Service. Anyone in there?" No answer. I approached carefully, noting the details. The windows weren't just broken. They'd been smashed outward from inside the cabin. Glass lay on top of the fresh snow, which meant it had happened after the storm started. The front door hung open, snow piled against the threshold. Inside, the cabin was chaos. Furniture pushed against walls like someone had built barricades. Canned food scattered across the floor, some opened and eaten, others just thrown around. A Coleman lantern lay smashed in the corner, kerosene staining the wooden floor. But no people. "Morrison family," I shouted. "This is Park Ranger Riversong. Are you here?" The wind answered. A low moan through the broken windows that sounded almost like a voice. I found the first body in the back bedroom. James Morrison, 42 years old according to the registration I'd seen. He lay twisted on the floor next to the bed, and I had to turn away after one look. Something had torn into him, like he was made of paper. But here's the thing that made my hands shake as I reached for my radio. The wounds didn't look like any animal attack I'd ever seen. They looked like teeth marks, human teeth marks, only much, much bigger. "Base, this is Riversong," I said into my radio, getting only static in return. Right. The tower was down. I was alone out here with whatever had happened to this family. In the main room, I found Sarah Morrison and one of the children. Same story. Torn apart, but not eaten. Not completely. Pieces were missing, but not the way a hungry animal would feed. More like someone had taken bites and then stopped. The second child, a boy, maybe 8 years old, was nowhere to be found. That's when I noticed the tracks. They started just outside the back door and headed deeper into the forest. Human-shaped, but wrong. Too long, too narrow, and some of them looked like they'd been made by feet walking backward. The stride was enormous, at least 4 feet between steps. I'd been a ranger long enough to know the tracks of every animal in these mountains. Bears, deer, wildcats, coyotes. I knew them all. These weren't animal tracks, and they weren't made by any human either. I followed them for about 50 yards before the storm covered them up. But I'd seen enough. Something had taken the Morrison boy, and whatever it was walked on 2 legs and had feet like no creature I'd ever heard of. The smart thing would have been to get back to town, get help, wait for the storm to pass. But that little boy might still be alive. In this cold, he had maybe hours before hypothermia killed him. I couldn't leave him. I went back to the cabin to gather supplies and try the radio one more time. As I picked through the scattered gear looking for anything useful, I heard it. A voice calling through the storm. "Help me! Please help me!" It was coming from the forest, maybe 100 yards away. A child's voice. "I'm coming!" I shouted back, grabbing my pack. "Keep calling so I can find you." "Help me!" The voice called again, fainter now. So cold. I plunged into the trees, following the sound. The snow was knee-deep, and even with snowshoes, every step was a struggle. "Keep talking," I called. "I'm almost there." But the voice had stopped. I stood in the forest, breathing hard, listening. Nothing but wind and the soft whisper of falling snow. "Hello?" I called. "Can you hear me?" That's when I realized something that made my blood freeze colder than the winter air. The voice I'd been following had been coming from above me. I looked up through the snow-heavy branches and saw him. The Morrison boy hung 30 feet up in an old oak tree, suspended by what looked like strips of his own clothing. His eyes were open, staring down at me, and his lips were moving. "Help me," he whispered, though he was too far away for me to actually hear the words. "So cold." But he wasn't speaking. His mouth moved, but the voice was coming from behind me. I spun around and saw nothing but trees and snow. The voice called again, off to my left now. "Help me, please." It was using the boy's voice to hunt me. I ran. Branches grabbed, at my clothes as I crashed through the underbrush, heading back toward the cabin. My snowshoes caught on hidden roots and logs, sending me sprawling face first into the snow. Behind me, I could hear something moving through the trees, not running, just walking, but keeping pace with my desperate flight. And it was laughing. Not with the boy's voice this time. Something deeper, older, like rocks grinding together in a landslide. I made it back to the cabin and slammed the door, pushing a heavy wooden table against it. My radio was dead static, my hands shaking too hard to work the dials properly. I tried to think clearly, to make sense of what I'd seen. The boy was dead. Had to be dead. Nothing could survive hanging in a tree in this cold. But something was using his voice, calling to me. Something that could climb trees and move through the forest without making proper tracks. I'd heard stories like this before, but always dismissed them as folklore. Mountain people talked about creatures that could imitate human voices, lure people into the woods. Wendigos, they called them in the old stories. Cannibalistic spirits that were once human, transformed by hunger and desperation into something monstrous. "Just stories," I whispered to myself, checking my rifle. "Just old stories." But the Morrison family wasn't a story. The boy in the tree wasn't a story. The scratching at the cabin walls wasn't a story either. It started soft, like branches scraping against wood. But branches don't scratch in rhythms. Branches don't tap out patterns like someone knocking to come in. I grabbed my flashlight and moved to the window, trying to see what was out there. A face looked back at me through the glass. It might have been human once. The basic shape was right. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth. But everything was wrong, stretched and twisted like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. The skin was gray-white, mottled with frostbite, and the eyes were yellow like old bones. When it smiled, I saw teeth. Too many teeth, all pointed, crammed into a mouth that opened wider than a human mouth should. "Let me in, Amanda," it said in the boy's voice. "I'm so cold." I backed away from the window, rifle raised. "Stay away from me." "But I know you," it continued, and now it was using my grandmother's voice, the one from my childhood memories. "You know the old stories, little sparrow. You know what I am." The scratching moved around the cabin, circling like a predator. At each window that face appeared, always with the same horrible smile. But the voice kept changing. The boy, my grandmother, even my own voice speaking back to me. "The Morrison family welcomed me in," it said. "Fed me when I was hungry. The father lasted the longest, strong man, but even he broke in the end." I realized what I was dealing with. This thing had been human once. Maybe someone from the old logging camp, maybe a hiker who got lost and desperate enough to do what you had to do to survive. But crossing that line, eating human flesh to stay alive, it had changed him into something else. Something that was always hungry. "I can smell you in there, Amanda. Warm blood, soft meat. It's been so long since I had a proper meal." The scratching stopped. The forest went silent again. I waited, rifle trained on the door, listening for any sound. Minutes passed. Maybe it had given up, moved on to hunt something else. That's when my radio crackled to life. "Amanda, this is Martin. I'm coming to help you." Martin Coalfield, my backup, based out of the station 20 miles south. He must have gotten worried when I didn't check in. "Martin," I grabbed the radio. "Don't come here. There's something in these woods, something dangerous. Static answered me. Martin, do you copy? Stay away from the logging camp. More static, then his voice again. I'm about 5 miles out. Should be there in an hour. No, Martin, turn around. Go back. But the radio went dead. I had to warn him. I had to get out of this cabin and intercept him before he walked into the same trap I was in. I checked my gear, rifle loaded, flashlight working, enough food and water for the night if I had to stay out in the storm. I pushed the table away from the door and stepped out into the blizzard. The forest felt different now. Not empty, full of something watching, waiting. Every shadow could hide that gray-white face. Every sound of wind through branches might be its voice calling to me. But I had to find Martin before it did. I found Martin 2 miles from the cabin, or what was left of him. He hung from a pine tree like a Christmas ornament, frozen solid, his snowmobile idling in a circle below until it ran out of gas. His face was locked in a scream, eyes wide with terror. But he'd been dead for hours, long before his voice had spoken to me on the radio. The Wendigo had used his voice to draw me out of the cabin. I was standing in the open forest, alone, exactly where it wanted me. Clever creature, aren't you? The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the trees. It was using my own voice now, talking to me like I was talking to myself. 11 years in these mountains, and you've never seen anything like me. I turned in a slow circle, rifle ready, trying to spot it among the trees. The snow fell harder now, and visibility was down to maybe 10 feet. My grandmother told me stories, I said aloud, hoping to keep it talking while I figured out how to get back to the cabin. She said Wendigos were made from people who broke the greatest taboo. Smart woman. Now it was speaking in Grandma Rose's voice, and the sound made tears freeze on my cheeks. The winter of 1887 was particularly harsh. The logging crew got snowed in for 3 months. Food ran out in January. A shadow moved between the trees, there and gone before I could aim. They drew lots to see who would die first, it continued. Fair and honorable, they thought. But when you taste human flesh, when you feel that warm blood filling your belly while good men die around you, you realize that fairness is just something the weak invented. You were one of them, I said, one of the loggers. I was their foreman, Ezra Blackwood. I kept them alive through the worst winter these mountains ever saw. Some of them, anyway. The shadow circled closer. I could smell it now. The stench of old meat and decay mixed with something sharper. Madness, maybe. Or just pure endless hunger. But the change, that came later, after I'd eaten enough, after I'd learned to love the taste. Your people have words for creatures like me, Amanda Riversong. Your grandmother knew. She also knew how to fight you, I said, remembering the old stories. Sacred fire, running water, things that Wendigos couldn't cross or touch. Did she tell you how? It laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Did she tell you about the ritual? I thought back to those fireside stories. Sacred fire. Not just any fire, but one blessed with the right words, the right intent. And I remembered Grandma Rose teaching me those words, making me repeat them until I had them memorized. Just stories, she'd said. But stories have power, little sparrow. Remember that. The creature stepped out from behind a massive oak tree. It had been human once, but that was a long time ago. Now it stood 12 feet tall, stretched thin like taffy, all bones and sinew under gray skin. Its ribs showed through its chest, and I could see its heart beating, black blood pumping through translucent skin. The face was the worst part, still recognizably human around the eyes, but everything else twisted into something that belonged in nightmares. You're going to feed me now, Amanda, it said in my grandmother's voice, just like the others did. And when the hunger takes you, when you become like me, we'll hunt these mountains together. No, I said, backing toward a fallen log. I don't think so. I pulled out my emergency flare and struck it. Red fire blazed in the darkness, and the Wendigo screamed, not in pain, but in rage. It couldn't approach the flame, but it circled at the edge of the light, waiting for the flare to burn out. I had maybe 3 minutes before the fire died. I started speaking the words Grandma Rose had taught me, the old Seneca phrases that turned ordinary fire into something sacred. The Wendigo's screams grew louder as the red flame began to turn white-hot. "You think your grandmother's magic will save you?" it snarled. "I've eaten medicine men before. Their power tastes just like their fear." But it stayed outside the circle of light. The flare was burning down. I had maybe 30 seconds left. I spotted a pine tree with dry needles still clinging to its branches. If I could set it ablaze with the sacred fire, create a bigger flame. The Wendigo saw what I was planning. It rushed forward just as the flare guttered out, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. I threw the dying flare at the pine tree and dove sideways as claws raked through the air where my head had been. The dry needles caught fire with a whoosh, and sacred flame spread up the tree like it was soaked in gasoline. The Wendigo shrieked and stumbled backward, but not before its claws found my shoulder, tearing through my jacket and into flesh. I rolled away, feeling warm blood soak my shirt. The burning tree lit up the forest like a torch. In its light, I could see the Wendigo clearly for the first time, and I could see it was afraid. Sacred fire was its weakness, just like the story said. I had more flares, 3 more in my pack. "You want to hunt these mountains?" I said, pulling out another flare and striking it. "Then you can burn in them too." They found me 3 days later, half frozen but alive, sitting next to the burned remains of what the official report called an unidentified animal carcass. The coroner said it was probably a bear, maybe sick or starving, that had attacked the Morrison family and then died in a forest fire I'd started too. Oh, stay warm. I didn't correct him. Martin Caulfield's death was ruled an accident, equipment failure on his snowmobile in whiteout conditions. The Morrison family had clearly been victims of animal attack and exposure. Tragic, but these things happened in the wilderness. The Cranberry Wilderness area was temporarily closed to camping and hiking until the bear problem could be addressed. But I knew there was no bear problem anymore. The sacred fire had done its work, just like Grandma Rose's stories promised it would. But Wendigos aren't unique creatures. They're made, not born. Every winter brings new desperation, new hungers, new people willing to cross the line that should never be crossed. The old logging camp has been quiet since 1977, but other places in these mountains, other places still echo with old hungers. I requested a transfer that spring. Couldn't handle the winter postings anymore. Couldn't sleep when the wind howled through the trees. Every shadow looked like gray-white skin. Every distant sound like voices calling for help. They gave me a summer position in Shenandoah, working with day hikers and car campers. Safe work, normal work. But even now, 40-some years later, I still wake up some nights hearing that voice calling through the storm. Help me. So cold. The thing about monsters is that killing one doesn't kill the idea of them. The Cranberry Wilderness opens every spring, closes every winter. Forest Service policy says it's for visitor safety, but the local rangers know better. We watch the weather reports, and when the snow gets deep enough, when the temperatures drop low enough, when people start going missing, well, that's when we tell folks to avoid the backcountry, for their own safety. Some stories are true, and some truths are too dangerous to share. But I'll tell you this much. If you ever find yourself in Appalachian wild, earnest during a bad winter, and you hear someone calling for help in the darkness, you make damn sure you can see them before you answer. Because sometimes the things calling out there aren't the ones who need rescuing. They're the ones doing the hunting.